How did you play the Uno reverse card on someone who attacked your character? As a lifeguard, we had a rule that very young kids needed an adult in the water within arm's reach in the main pool. I saw this mum and her 5-year-old walk in. The mum is wearing jeans and on her phone, clearly not planning on swimming. I anticipate the issue and go to talk to her before the kid gets in. I explain our policy, that the pool is 4 feet deep minimum and that the policy is for the safety of the child, that having a parent close by who can respond in case of drowning immediately is by far faster than relying on the lifeguard to get down, jump in, and swim all the way out for a rescue. She says it's a stupid policy, that her kid is a fantastic natural swimmer and that they take him to the lake and he swims just fine. That I'm accusing her of being a bad parent, that I just don't want to do my job, all of the classic offended parent BS. Literally while she's telling me this, the kid runs and jumps into the pool, dog paddles about 10 feet out away from the edge, then goes into active drowning mode, requiring a rescue from the other lifeguard, who thankfully was basically already there to catch the kid. She signed the refusal of care and left quicker than anyone I've ever seen. Felt bad for the kid. She seemed almost mad at him for making her look like an idiot. I started working on the production line of an auto parts manufacturer. I was hot-pressing rivets into the base of an emergency brake base. According to production logs, a day's run was 300 pieces. Acceptable errors were 3. I worked there for 2 weeks before the line supervisor advised my managing consultant that I was not meeting production requirements. According to my logs, I had 0 errors and exceeded my 300 quota every day. Another line supervisor confided in me that I was being replaced with my supervisor's cousin, just arrived from the Philippines. I didn't argue or protest, it would have done me no good. The managing consultants knew as well but had no pull. After re-examining my resume and seeing I had a degree in computer science and certification in technical manual writing, I was brought back to the very same production floor in a different role. As a part of QA compliance, every workstation needed the production one-offs documented with illustrated inspection reference guides. When I arrived at the office, my former line supervisor demonstrated the quadruple take. Patrick Stewart had nothing on her. No one told her what my role was. My presence there resembled that of a site inspector. I walked the entire floor borrowing templates, taking measurements and photos. It looked very official. My former line supervisor thought that I was on her production line as a ringer to inspect her. She worked every day worried that I was preparing to give her the axe. She shared that concern in confidence with others who knew better. Nobody corrected her, they just told her not to worry. Well, either you're a much better person than most of us, or the sweet, sweet smell of her fear was enough to sustain your need for revenge. Honestly, working for someone you were convinced was going to try and fire you for years on end would probably be disastrous for your mental health. I'd be searching jobs during office hours. That's some sweet revenge for you. I was a service desk technician at a hospital helping a doctor reset his password. He kept misspelling his temporary password. It was welcome12345. Turns out he thought welcome has 2 L's and freaked out at me citing his education and my, at the time, lack thereof as evidence that he was right. After going back and forth, he got frustrated and handed me off to his nurse and left. She got it on the first try and then apologized to me for her boss's behavior. The funnest part was that as she was hanging up, I heard her talking to another nurse saying, "Yep, Dr. Dumb Idiot couldn't spell welcome again." I film and edit promotional videos. Then I post them on my company's YouTube channel. The day after I uploaded a particular run-of-the-mill video, my manager called me into his office because one of our D-bag directors, who hates our department and loves undermining me in particular, sent an email to my manager and a few higher-ups. In the email, he stated that I'd messed up the promo video because there were all of these other disgusting videos attached to it. As proof, he included a screenshot of the end of the video where all of the recommended videos appeared to star scantily clad Asian women in suggestive poses. Neither he nor my manager knew how YouTube algorithms worked, that the videos were suggested because he or someone on his account viewed that kind of content before. I have no idea how my manager explained this to him. I had a boss who thought everyone else was an idiot. One morning, the computer in the office wasn't working. She asks me if I knew anything about computers, and I tell her that I've used one before. She tells me to check the computer in the office and see if I can figure out why it's stopped working. I press the power button and she calls me a moron, telling me that she's already tried that herself. I get under the desk for a moment and then come back up. I tell her to press the power button again and it comes right on. She asks me what was wrong with it, and I tell her that it was unplugged. Our school's schedule got revamped, which meant that one of our classes that was 2 periods long was cut in half to accommodate all of the changes. When I brought this up to the teacher I was co-teaching with, she called me an idiot and told everyone sitting in our table group that I wasn't very good at math, and everyone laughed at me. A few minutes later, the principal cleared up the new schedule, only for her to realize that she was wrong in the first place. Felt so good to see the look on her face when she realized she was the idiot and not me. Guy tried to tell me he knew more of my job than I did because he went to school to be an engineer, and that I just sell the machines. I emailed him info directly from the manufacturer on why he was wrong. He's not my client anymore. I don't care. Screw him and anyone who uses education as a reason to be a jerk. Had a friend in college who was very full of himself. One morning while eating breakfast in the cafeteria, someone said, "I wonder how bagels are made." I said, "I'm pretty sure bagels are boiled and then baked." The pompous friend then said, "Are you stupid? Bagels aren't boiled. That's ridiculous." Someone did a quick Google search to find that bagels are in fact boiled for a minute or two before baking. People seemed genuinely intrigued by this information. When I was in 8th grade, we'd just learned about the seasons and Earth's rotation and all that. To my surprise, my teacher taught us that the Earth is actually closest to the Sun during winter in our country, but it's cold because of the tilt on the axis, not because of the proximity to the Sun. The tilt determines the seasons. And then soon after that, I went to math class and my teacher said something about how it was freezing because we're so far from the sun. And of course I piped up to tell him he was wrong, according to what Mr. Science teacher had just taught us. My math teacher went off, ripping into me so hard in front of the class. I should mention it was lighthearted. He was known for being funny and making fun of kids all the time. Him and I were going back and forth for a while, and I specifically remember him saying, "Oh yeah, because when I'm cold I move away from the fire. Yeah, that makes perfect sense." And I kept arguing, "No, it's because of the Earth's tilt." And so finally he Googled it, and I was right. He at least gave me credit and admitted that he was in the wrong after that. A Dutch couple visited my workplace. It was a tourist visitor center. They insisted that the French translation on our map was wrong. The reasoning was that Groenland shouldn't be there because it was the Dutch word for Greenland, not the French one. I told them that Groenland was also the French translation, to which they chided back, "And how would you know?" "I'm bilingual. I speak French," I informed them. "Clearly not very well," they insisted, and then proceeded to ask for the Wi-Fi so they could use Google Translate. Well, I gave them the Wi-Fi, and to Google Translate they went. Sure enough, Groenland. They didn't even apologize. They just said, "I guess the map is correct then," and then left. Jerks. A tour group had a dad in it who insisted on trying to give us 2 cents on my animals and proceeded to put his fingers in the tank with our stunted gators, despite my warning and practically yelling at him not to. The whole time he was saying how hatchlings couldn't hurt a human, only for the male to shoot out of his favorite hiding spot and latch onto the guy's hand. Yeah, I had to bite my tongue to stop laughing. This guy feels like the kind of person who gives a 3-minute diatribe every time a guide, teacher, or other official asks a group any questions. And as someone who dies inside every time one of those people opens their mouths, thank you, little alligator. I lived in Germany for a year after high school as part of an exchange program, and there were several times where I had to make phone calls. I had to call doctors, employers, program coordinators and stuff, so I got fairly used to the whole telephone garb in German. I could speak pretty fluently on the phone, but since it's not my native language, I would of course make small grammatical errors and stuff like that. This led to the unfortunate situation where people would assume I was German when on the phone because I spoke well enough, but since I kept making mistakes, they'd also think I was stupid. People were quite rude to me over the phone, assuming that was due to the assumed stupidity. After revealing I was actually a foreigner, they always sounded so surprised and complimentary of my German and were much more helpful and polite afterwards. At work one day, writing a menu board for lunch specials, a couple came in and started chuckling behind me. This lady gives me the snide look and says, "What's a sandwich? It's spelt sandwich, honey." She wrote sand, like in the desert. I just smiled and didn't even correct her. That cocky stupidity was truly a sight to behold. I'm an application developer in the public sector. I've made many of the computer programs where I work, such as the human resources, incident reporting, and some of the case management systems. Several times I've had people try to tell me, wrongly, how to use an application that I made. I especially like it when they tell me I should ask the people at the company. What company would that be? I tell them that it's very flattering that they think the software was made by an entire company instead of by me alone in my office. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I used to work at the Courtyard Marriott Hotel, which is a hotel oriented for business people who have to go up early and work late. You know, real workhorses and road warriors. The hotel was a sprawling 5 stories tall with about 200 or so rooms. It was also right next to LAX, so we always got a lot of business people flying in thinking they were hot crap because their company flew them out to do business in LA. Whatever. This one day I'm working the front desk and it's kind of late, around midnight, and one of our guests comes in kind of drunk and asks me to reset his room key before he heads to his room because you always do them wrong. So I'm like, yep, sure thing, not a problem, have a good night. He comes back down 5 minutes later, visibly agitated, and says, "Oh, what the heck, man? I thought I told you to remake my keys. Can't you do your freaking job right?" And in the hospitality industry, you're not allowed to talk back or raise your voice, or really stand up for yourself. Your one and only goal is to make the guest feel welcome. So I apologize, take the blame and say it won't happen again, and make him an extra key. He snatches them from my hand and storms off to his room. 5 minutes later, he comes back down again. "What is wrong with you? Are you stupid? Are you wasting my time on purpose? I'm heading to my room and you'd better come up with working room keys." And he throws his keys at me. My manager sees all of this happen and is like, "You know what? Let me handle this. You deserve a break." I'm fuming, of course. I go to the break room and just pace, wondering what gives people the audacity to act like that. My manager eventually comes back, enters the break room with a smile and clearly something to report. He says he was going to the wrong floor. His room was actually 1 floor up. He said he's sorry. I wish I could have seen his face. When I worked as a cashier in a grocery store, people would always want to argue about their produce. They'd bring up heads of iceberg lettuce and then argue with me that they were green cabbage or vice versa. I'd always just smile, void the product, and then charge them for what they thought it was. The best was seeing people come back later angry that their coleslaw didn't work. The best, though, was the sweet potato versus yam argument that I'd have with people several times during the week leading up to Thanksgiving. Most of what we sell in the US are sweet potatoes, though some sweet potatoes grown in one state, Louisiana, are the yam variety of the sweet potato. But people often call them yams and will fight you over it, even though true yams are hard to find unless your store stocks stuff for Latin American customers. We did, but yams were rarely in stock and always more expensive than sweet potatoes. Anyway, sweet potatoes would go on sale for the holiday and people would buy lots of them. Every time I rang them up, I'd get told that they were yams and that I was dumb for not knowing that. So I'd void them and ring them up as yams are 4 times the price. When the customers would want the sale price, I'd kindly remind them that I'd tried to give them the sales price, but they'd ask me to ring them up as yams instead. I had a paper returned to me this morning because I didn't write out the full names of the authors in the manuscript. I took a screenshot of their submission guidelines detailing, "Author names must be formatted with the first initial followed by last name," and I sent it back. I got an apology email and a submission received notification a few minutes later. Academia. I swear to God. I was asked by my brother and girlfriend which planet is the first starting from the sun. I was then belittled for 20 minutes after asking Mercury because they were adamant it was Venus. I was just disappointed because we're in our 20s. Yeah, it's a little different when you share genes with the person and are just reminded of your bloodline's capacity for failure, I think. Still, the fact that you at least knew the right answer shows that hopefully one of you apples fell a long way from the family tree. Corporate trainer came to our offices to provide training. I popped into the room to say hello and see if she needed help. She was having trouble setting up the projector before the session. I started trying to help, but I'm not really savvy with projectors. She was getting frustrated with me as she assumed I was the IT dude, and obviously not a very good one. We eventually got it fixed and I offered her a coffee. She was a bit rude to me by that stage. I got her one anyway. Fast forward to the session itself, I introduced her to the room of 40 people and thanked her for coming. She realized then that I was the head of the division and was the one paying for her to be there. I felt quite smug at that point. She was flustered because she was trying to prepare for the meeting, but that's no excuse for crapping on the guy trying to help her. The interesting thing is, she has quite a public profile, podcast, and website among other things, and is always preaching love and tolerance as part of her training. Clearly not that particular day. Oh, working in retail has those moments constantly. People don't read the signs right, and one guy didn't get the right chips for the deal and was getting mad at me, and told me to come and he'll show me the sign. I'd already dealt with people not reading the fine print on that deal, so I told him, "I'm not going to look at anything, you can go look for yourself, read it and then come back with the right product." He came back without an attitude because he knew he was wrong, and from that point on, I always had my guard up when I saw him come in, and I was ready for a fight each time. My stepmom used to be an occupational therapist and would help the elderly in the hospital. One patient she had worked with was Vietnamese, so he didn't know English. He came with his son, so my stepmom decided to ask him about his father, but her coworker interrupted saying, "I don't believe he speaks English." This whole time the son hadn't said a word while my stepmom was working with his father. When they were done, the father and son left, and as soon as they were at the door, the son turned around and said, "Remember, I don't speak English." The coworker was dumbfounded when he said that, and all my stepmom could do was laugh. Oh sure, but I find the opposite is a better teaching environment. I was playing Street Fighter in a 7-Eleven. We'd been playing it I think for years and felt pretty confident in the game. Some 14-year-old comes in and starts telling us about the Guile handcuffs. We scoffed and laughed at him. Guile doesn't have handcuffs. And holy crap, he showed us the damn move. Granted, it was a bug, but I never forgot that. When I was in the army, me and a group of specialists were standing in a circle, taking a break in the motor pool. A lieutenant came out and said he needed a forklift driver and went around the circle pointing at each male and asked them if they had their license. None of them did. He huffed and walked away. He'd clearly, obviously skipped over the other female and I in the circle. That was fine. We were the only 88M, or heavy vehicle operators, and forklift-licensed people there. The dudes were all paralegals and HR specialists. Everyone laughed. It was an embarrassing moment for him. I'm currently a junior in college, and a couple of weeks ago, when the semester started dying down, I left the dorms to come back home and finish things out online. I also started working at the local grocery store as well. Around a week ago, as I was checking out 2 customers, when they told me they wanted to pay 50-50 with 2 cards. Our system requires us to manually enter the price, so I did so, and the lovely gentleman told me my math was wrong and said he's a sophomore engineering student at a school nearby to help justify why he was correct. I respond, "Oh cool, I'm actually a junior at," and I inserted a much better engineering school. "What are you studying?" While also pulling up a calculator and showing him he was wrong. Everyone always assumes the workers here are dumb, so it's nice to show them otherwise. Some years ago, some guys were talking about cars and engines, and I don't even remember what else. One of them was really condescending to me, a female, and said, "But you probably don't know anything about that, do you?" My husband set him straight and said, "She knows a lot more about cars than I do, so don't be so sure." Then of course the guy tried to prove he knew more. He did not. I grew up around race cars and auto mechanics, who also thought everyone should understand their own car. I have to admit I know less now that they're all electric and computerized, but this was back in the day. My wife and I were traveling with a couple we worked with in South Korea. We weren't the best friends with them, but they were nice enough, so we rented a car and traveled around the Isle of Jeju. Now, this is a small island that you could drive around in about 4 or 5 hours, but we were taking our time seeing the sights. The guy was a bit of a know-it-all, but they'd been in Korea 6 months longer than us, so I always took his advice. Anyway, I'm driving the car and we're trying to find the place that we want to eat, and I say something like, "We're going the right way." And this guy responds with, "No, we're going south. Trust me, I majored in geography." I look straight ahead into the setting sun and respond with, "Weird. We found the one place on Earth where the sun sets in the south." Well, that shut him up for a while. Honestly, despite the great joke in the Avengers movie that basically implies everyone knows where the sun sets, it's the kind of thing that I'd never think to look for. Good on you for being able to get some reprieve from a know-it-all with it. I was working as a teller in the bank years ago, and a Karen was complaining about how slow and crappy my computer was. If I'd been using an IBM, she'd have been out of there already. She works at IBM, they only make the best, fastest bank equipment. Blah, blah, blah. I slowly, deliberately turned my slow, crappy IBM computer for her to look at. Not another word. I'm French and live in France, but I grew up in the UK and consider English to be like my mother tongue. When I was 17, I had to change schools, from a private one to a public one, and this was for personal reasons, but my new classmates assumed the reason was because my grades were too low and I got kicked out. That private school had high standards. Anyway, it's the first day of school and we have English class. The teacher hands out a list of sentences we have to translate and asks us to compare translations with our neighbor. The first sentence is rather hard to translate from French, and the teacher, having walked around and looked at our answers, announces that only one person in the class has got it right. We compare answers with our neighbors. The girl next to me sees my translation. "How long has it been raining for?" And she bursts out laughing. "Has it been? Has it been? I've never heard that in my life. That is so stupid." And she makes fun of me for a good while to the other girl sitting next to her. Being new and also knowing that she was going to feel stupid in a couple of minutes, I didn't say anything. Sure enough, the teacher announces that I was right, and my classmates quickly discovered that I was actually a fluent English speaker with excellent grades pretty much all around. It made making friends really hard, but I hope that girl learned her lesson to never make fun of someone without knowing the full story. Or never make fun of people ever. That would be way better. Was talking about binary star systems at a party when suddenly my ex says, "That's not what a binary is, are you dumb?" Then another friend looked up the word binary and read it out loud to him and his eyes bugged out. I told him, "Stop pretending to be an expert on things you don't understand, it makes you look like an idiot." My ex was thinking of binary computer code. He didn't consider that other things could be binary too. Teachers, what's your "that student definitely isn't going places" moment? As a getting to know you activity, I asked students, if you could be anyone in history, who would you be and why? One student's answer, Eleanor Roosevelt, because I've always wanted to be black. Asked my student, 7th grade life science, why he has Fs in all of his classes and why he doesn't bother to care about it. He proceeds to tell me with the most confident smile that he's making it into the NBA. I assigned students to do a group presentation of a story from mythology at the end of the school year. I told them they could choose from Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Norse, or any other system they chose. 2 students chose a story from Norse mythology about Thor. They presented the story, which included characters like Loki, Captain America, Iron Man, etc., completely seriously. I spoke to them at the end of the class and they had no clue that Marvel Cinematic Universe was not a part of Norse mythology. Used to teach English in Japan. Had a 4-year-old kid who would run at top speed toward the wall, throw himself into it, stumble around going, "ouch," for a few seconds, then do it all again, for an hour straight if we would let him. Had a 7-year-old who stripped off down to his underpants, then skipped around the room singing the Pokemon theme song for the whole class. Finally got him dressed up again just as the lesson ended. He looked up at me and said in complete seriousness, "Sensei, I did a good job." Had a 12-year-old kid who would take off his socks and chew on his toenails in the middle of my lessons. Kids, man, they're weird. I think, due to the behavior of the 4-year-old, there was a modest to good chance all of these were the same kid. It's not uncommon as a teacher to have students who are a bit behind the curve in certain aspects, but 99.9999% of the time, they are keen on something. They might not understand how to identify a noun or what theme is, but they somehow know how to make a mean plate of nachos. You learn pretty quick not to judge fish for their tree climbing ability, you know? I thought this was the rule when I was teaching until I met Kevin. Kevin isn't his real name, but it doesn't matter because he can't spell it anyway. Kevin was a student of mine during my last year of teaching. He came to my classroom with very little to show for his academic past. He had moved a few times and thus was missing a lot of typical test scores that we used to try and ballpark their ability. Don't worry, it was a ballpark. We didn't make major decisions until we actually had a chance to talk to and work with a student for a bit. I thought, that's fine, I'll just do some one-on-one with Kevin and see what's up. One-on-one with Kevin was like conversing with someone who'd forgotten everything in a freak, if not impossible, amnesia accident. There was no evidence that he had learned anything past the 2nd grade, and now he was in the 9th grade. Flabbergasted, I figured we needed to get more serious with this. If he was going to be in my class, I needed to know why and how. I decided to meet with him, his guidance counselor, his parents, and another teacher to see what was really going on. This is where it all became clear. It was by some incredible fluke that his family hadn't been wiped off the face of the earth years ago. Odds are his entire heritage was based on blind luck and some type of sick divine intervention that saves his family every time a threat presents itself. Kevin was the genetic pinnacle of this null achievement. Even my instructional lead, a woman who could find a redeeming trait in a Balrog, failed to see any reason this kid or his family should be alive today. So here's a list of events that made it abundantly clear that God exists and he's laughing uncontrollably. Kevin frequently forgot when and where class was. On more than one occasion, I had to retrieve him from other classrooms. Kevin ate an entire 24-pack of crayons, puked, and then did it again the next day. This is 9th grade. I have no idea where he got crayons. Kevin's dad wrote tuition checks and mailed them to me, his English teacher. This was a public school. When I gave it back to Kevin, voided, to give to his dad with a brief note explaining that this is a public school, Kevin got in trouble for trying to spend it at a 7-Eleven after school. Kevin was removed from the culinary arts program after leaving a cutting board on the gas stove and starting a fire. Twice. Kevin threw his lunch at the school resource officer and tried to run away. He ran into a door and insisted it wasn't him. Kevin stole my phone during class. I called it. It rang. He denied it was ringing. Not that it wasn't his, not that he did it, no. No, he denied that the phone was actually ringing. He tried 3 times before the end of the year. Kevin called the female basketball coach a mother-flipping B-word during gym. Basketball tryouts were that afternoon. Kevin tried out. It didn't go well. Kevin's mum could never remember which school he went to. She missed several meetings because she drove to other schools, none of which he ever went to. Kevin tased himself in the neck before a football game. Kevin kept a bottle of orange Kool-Aid in his backpack for about 4 months. He thought it would turn into alcohol. He drank it during homeroom and threw up. Kevin said the N-word a lot. Kevin was white. The high school was 84% black. Kevin got beat up a lot. Kevin stole another student's iPhone and tried to sell it back to them. Kevin didn't understand that his grade was dependent on tests, quizzes, homework, classwork, and participation. Kevin finished his first semester with a 3% average. He tried to bribe me with $11. Kevin spit on a girl and said, "You should get out of those wet clothes." The girl was the Spanish student teacher. Kevin didn't know dogs and cats were different animals. Kevin tried to download adult flicks onto a computer in the library, at the circulation desk, while he was logged on. Kevin asked a girl to prom, he was in the 9th grade and freshmen don't go to prom, by asking for her phone number and then texting her his address. Kevin got gum in his hair constantly. Kevin regularly tried to cheat on assignments by knocking the pile over, grabbing one before I had picked them all up, and then writing his name on it wherever there was room. Kevin had several allergies, but neither his parents nor he could remember what they were. They were very concerned that the holiday party, it's high school, we don't have those, would have peanuts. When they finally got a doctor's note, he was allergic to amoxicillin. Kevin and his parents took a trip to Nassau. How the F did they even get airline tickets? And forgot all their luggage at home. I didn't believe him when he told me until I talked to his mum, who told me first thing when I saw her at the bi-weekly meeting. Kevin's grandfather apparently died in a chainsaw accident. I can only assume God was looking the other way that day. Folks, I would be ashamed to tell you how many takes that story took me because I was just laughing so much. Oh, Kevin, I can only hope that your savings of $11 from the rejected bribe afforded you some small comfort in your life after school. In the last few weeks before the AP exam, I gave my classes a series of practice tests, written by College Board, to take in class under a time constraint to give them practice. One student, let's call him Bill, always tried to cheat in my class. I'd gotten sick of putting in the effort to catch him, and it didn't matter because the entire point of the class was to prepare for the AP exam. Bill started off each test by staring at the page and answering 1 or 2 questions. Then, as always, he asked to go to the bathroom during the test. I let him go and he took his phone, of course. He returns and frantically bubbles in the rest of the test and turns it in early. I have to hand it to him. Bill was great at memorizing letters for the answers of the practice tests, but he failed the AP exam. This isn't really the kid's fault, more the parents', but my sister teaches in Hong Kong, generally 3 to 4-year-olds, and she had this one kid, called Enzo, if I remember right, who kept acting out, completely ignoring my sister and her TA when they spoke to him, and doing badly in the classwork they're given. He also didn't speak, at all, tended to play by himself. So my sister called in his parents to discuss it, voiced her concerns that there might be behavioral problems, maybe something deeper seated. His parents then confided in her that it's probably not that, more that the kid didn't speak a lick of English or Cantonese, i.e., the 2 languages used in the school and most of Hong Kong. They were both relatively affluent Italians, so they'd raised the kid speaking Italian and lied that he spoke English fluently so he could get admitted into the school, as it was a requirement that they had to have a basic understanding, if I recall correctly. My sister raised her concerns with the principal after she had the meeting, and they responded by just moving the kid to another class. She said she still sees him sitting alone during lunch breaks. I really feel for the kid though. He's only young, and he's pretty much been alienated and won't learn properly, because his parents are so dead set on shoving him into the most expensive school, assuming that he'll learn well. Not a teacher, but in one of my health and sex ed classes, a girl in my class said she wasn't afraid of getting AIDS, because if she got it, she'd just give it to someone else, and therefore not have it anymore. Yeah, that was an interesting day once we realized she was serious. A university freshman turned in a paper on the Treaty of Versailles that conformed to no known formatting system I had ever seen. There didn't even seem to be paragraphs. Assuming that his computer had jumbled it up somehow when he turned it in, I went to give it back to him in class one day so he could fix it. He informed me it was intentional. The format meant that the paper was meant to be read as a rap, which he proceeded to do for me in the few minutes before class started. It was incredible. D+. I always thought that Lin-Manuel Miranda's Hamilton was truly a musical beyond reproach. I now see that he may have caused some issues in the schooling system. Okay, so I had a student in middle school that couldn't read. That wasn't a huge deal. Kid had issues. Once he got angry at me and told me he was going to rip off my buttons. It may have been literal or figurative. Didn't matter. Remember, issues. It was my job to teach him to read. He should have already been in high school. He was 14 and in middle school. I worked individually with this kid every day. Finally, I just asked him what he was going to do for a living, if he couldn't read and wouldn't try. He gave me a pretty standard answer. I'll play basketball or sell drugs. I should mention that he was barely over 5 foot tall. I worried about him. He was my student for 2 years. Eventually, he moved on and I switched high school. So 20 years later, I got curious. I remember most of my students and this kid had a name that stood out a bit. I Google his name, hoping he won't be in prison. A lot of my former students are. I find him right away. He's a professional basketball player. For Ukraine. Retired now, but still, good for him. Made himself proud. As a note, he turned 15 in middle school. He did learn how to read, he graduated, and went to college. Apparently he struggled for a while, but he's human. His history was not ideal. I'm concerned about naming him because of his privacy. He played from 2006 to 2010. One of the fellas in my university first-year computer programming class stared at the wall. The same spot. The whole class. Every class. He'd walk in on time, sit down, open his folder, and stare at the wall, and didn't ever take a note that I saw. At the end of the wall-staring duration of the class, he'd close his likely still blank folder, get up, and leave without a word. I see him from time to time at the grocery store, collecting up the carts. I feel a little bad for whoever funded his education, but am pleased that he has a steady job. My 8th grade physical science lab partner took the top off one of those oil burners, poured the oil all over our desk, and then lit it on fire. Like on purpose. Did you think it would be less flammable because it's on the table now? Hilariously, even though I was the one who put the fire out and had nothing to do with lighting it, I still got suspended too. I guess the lesson I was supposed to learn was never help put out a fire. Here's one from my mum. The class ate at one of those medieval-themed restaurants on a field trip, and one little brat took advantage of the setting and the overflowing cleavage. He referred to the waitress as his wench, and demanded that she butter his bread, all so she would bend over to better reveal her bountiful bosom. He ordered the turkey legs, then wielded them theatrically like Henry VIII, while thanking the waitress for giving him a bone. When my mum got home, she said he was a sexual harassment lawsuit waiting to happen. I'm late, but I have a winner. The class was an applied math course for high schoolers, and we held a paper airplane design contest. The rule was that you could use anything on the table to make your airplane, and that the person who threw theirs the furthest down the hallway would win. The table had all manner of things on it: printer paper, construction paper, tape, rulers, compasses, toothpicks, duct tape, paper clips, masking tape, a stapler, and even Elmer's glue. Well, the class went to work and for an hour designed some very interesting airplanes. Except for Tim. Tim sat quietly and chatted with his friends until about 30 seconds were left to build. Then he went up to the table, grabbed a few things, and sat back down to wait. When it came time to throw, it turned out that his airplane was a piece of paper wrapped around the stapler, while the lighter and more complex planes drifted to the side and landed early or hit the hallway walls. Tim's plane slammed straight into the door on the other side of the hall with a satisfying clunk. Tim's ridiculous creation beat everyone else out and won the contest easily, while technically obeying the rules of the competition. I hope that guy ends up working for NASA. My other favorite student was a kid who ate a glue stick for $5. He figured it was edible because it said non-toxic. Technically correct, but so wrong. He had to go home due to the uncontrollable vomiting. I'm not sure if he was ever paid the $5. My third favorite was a middle schooler whose mum was dissed by another student in class. His reaction, not having any decent weapons on him, was to rip out the 3-ring, part of a 3-ring binder, and use the prongs to attack the other student's forearm. Unfortunately, that kid isn't going anywhere but juvie unless he can help with his anger issues. Too bad, because it was an ingenious improvised weapon, and he probably could have used that creativity some other way. Kindergarten teacher. Testing students on community helpers, asked a student to name 3 community helpers. Child responds, "Firefighter man." Now I really thought, yes, she's got this in the bag. A hot dog and a monkey. Yeah, no. Kiss your brain, though. Blatant and low-effort plagiarism. Like it's literally the first Google result if you search topic, example essay. But they add their name in a different font and size, which should make it obvious at a glance, as if the use of capitalization and punctuation wasn't a dead giveaway that they didn't write it. I had a student pull that last year, while his even dumber buddy didn't even put his name in it. In fact, it wasn't even an essay, it was a selection of question prompts. Basically, 2 Kevins in one class. I also had a kid at the very end of the day continually F around with his skateboard and become very hostile when I insisted on holding it until the last bell. He ran out the door, jumped on it, and promptly fell and broke his jaw. His parents then threatened to sue the school because he got hurt there doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. Oh, this is a great one. Twice this week, the same student brought a popsicle in to have as a snack for lunch. Needless to say, he was very disappointed. His mum might actually pack his lunch. Blatant, low-effort plagiarism is not exclusive to younger students. Look forward to it all the way through university. As for the popsicle kid, that seems like another case of neglectful parenting. Been a history teacher for 3 months and was teaching about the Middle Colonies and how it was the breadbasket of America. The next day as a warm-up, I ask what the breadbasket is. She rose her hand without her even skipping a beat and starts going off about how I'm so dumb because it's called the chicken basket, where you get your tenders, 2 sides, and it also comes with bread, but that isn't what it's called. This poor girl has a lot more stories. This is just the one that stands out to me the most. Other stories include wondering how Obama was the first black president because she also thought Abraham Lincoln was black. Her reasoning behind it all was that he was really, really tall. Granted, she's also black, so yeah. Along with that, I've had to explain that we did have color back then. She couldn't believe that people before the 1950s still had color as the only TVs and photos were black and white. She constantly calls people cockatoos. 3 weeks ago, she asked which history I'm teaching. I honestly don't know if I really suck as a teacher or if it's her. Mind you guys, I do teach 8th grade US history. I wanted to believe all kids are smart, but I'm just slowly not going to hold on to that belief anymore. These are the highlights. Ask again next year and I'll have stories from multiple kids. I want to reap in that sweet, sweet karma. Not a teacher, but I work as a bouncer, and on Saturday some girl was persistently trying to get into my bar, but looked young and didn't have ID with her. After telling her no about 30 times and her complaining about everyone hating on her, a guy walked in and told us he's one of her high school teachers and that she's 17. She took off awfully quick when he showed up, and I can only imagine how things went in school today. I once had a couple of exchange students steal from my store when I was managing a Lids. They walked out the store and we followed closely after them. We turned the corner and they were stopped talking to their teacher. We patiently waited while they finished talking to the teacher, all while getting strange looks from him. He started to walk away, and we immediately tell the kids we need the hats they stole, to which they replied, "We will give them back, but we can do it somewhere else. That's our teacher." Like I was going to cut them a break after they stole. Teacher notices that there is a problem and comes back and absolutely laid into them, telling them they were going to go to jail and get expelled. We had no intent of pressing charges, they were only around 15 and stole 2 hats, but my God, if that teacher didn't put the fear of God into them. It turns out they were spoiled rich kids from another country who actually had the money to pay but thought stealing would be cooler. We ended up getting a call from the school. They had to write an apology letter for us, and they had to do 30 hours of volunteer work for the charity of our choice. They threatened to shut down the school's exchange program because of them as well, but I never heard of what came of it after that. Worked with 3-year-olds. One was crying and pointing at another kid, so I asked what happens. She mostly speaks Spanish but understands English, so I started asking her, "Are you hurt?" "Yes." "Did she hit you?" "Yes." "Did she kick you?" "Yes." Then the other child chimes in, "Nuh-uh, I didn't kick her, I just punched her in the face." My sister is a teacher from a local school. Like many great teachers, she's also responsible for a form group. In this case, a rowdy and rambunctious group of 15-year-olds she'd inherited from a newly retired teacher. Some kids stand out more than others, and not always for the right reasons. The epitome of that rule existed in my sister's form group. She had the misfortune to be called Xena by her Tumblr feminist mother, and Xena herself had followed firmly in her mother's footsteps. She was considered unpopular, and certainly the other kids were unfair and cruel, but she didn't help matters herself. My sister has told many stories of Xena, up to and including the time she spontaneously began speaking in an accent, which sounded like the illegitimate offspring of a Pakistani accent, Irish, and a speech impediment. The accent vanished as mysteriously as it had appeared over the course of the lunch hour. The time she claimed the powers of clairvoyance in chemistry. The kid torching pencils with a Bunsen burner apparently never particularly cared if their great-aunt Doreen wanted to warn them of misfortune. The time she shaved her head and refused to wear her uniform because it was stifling her creativity. The John Cena meme was in full swing, and Xena had earned the nickname owing to her buzz cut and unfortunate head shape. Kids would hum his theme tune upon seeing Xena in the school. A memo was sent around the faculty concerning the matter, but half of the staff were convinced that John Cena was a politician. My sister was running improvisation drills when Xena broke in with one of her prime stories. She was the daughter of a Mauritian man named Jonathan, she said. Her skin was the color of milk, smooth and pale. Jonathan was a man of great importance. She had been born in Mauritius and swiftly smuggled over to the UK with her mother. As a newborn. Born and raised in England, by the way. There was a beat of stunned, awkward silence until a particular crapbag of a child screeched, "John Cena!" and slammed his mate's head into the desk. When was your last, "I've got to get the hell out of here" moment? It was years ago when I was in 4th grade. My parents used to get into fights all the time, especially when my dad was drinking. They'd start yelling and that would turn into actual fistfights. At this time, we were living in a small trailer, and the room I shared with all 3 of my siblings was the one at the end of the trailer, near the back door. So my dad comes home drunk, Mum is angry, and starts yelling, and it escalates from there. Being on a small trailer, everything sounds so close and terrifying, and as the oldest of the 4, I felt the need to protect my siblings, but I didn't know what to do. After a while, my mum starts screaming my name at the top of her lungs, and I can still hear my dad screaming too, and I knew that I needed to get myself and my siblings out of there ASAP. I ushered them out of the room, down the hallway, and out the back door, and told them to head to our aunt's place, who lived a few trailers down. My mum was still screaming for me, and all I knew to do was yell, "I got them out, Mum! We're leaving!" before also going out the back to my aunt's. I don't recall ever being that scared. Cops came, and they both went to jail and were both out in a couple of days, and acted like nothing had ever happened. A few years ago, I brought the incident up to my mum. I told her that I thought she was screaming at me to get the siblings out of the house, and that's why I had. She told me she was screaming my name because she was scared and wanted help, and didn't know who else to call for. I felt so bad because I didn't help her, but there's really not much I could have done. I worked in a factory that made large plastic items via filling molds with powder and sending into a giant industrial oven that turned to 550 degrees Fahrenheit. At the end of the week, I was cleaning said oven and my boss, not knowing I was inside, turned it on. At the sound of hydraulic doors closing, I dove out of the oven as they closed and avoided free cremation. I both got the hell out of that oven and that company pretty quick. In the fall, I was walking down the trail in the woods during the middle of the day. A raccoon was sitting in the middle of the trail facing us, sitting on its butt, head kind of lowered, bugs buzzing all around it. It didn't move at all, it just stared at us. We decided to turn around. I don't know what rabies looks like, but that's not how I want to find out. On the New York City subway, I watched a grown man pull his pants down and use the support rod in the middle of the train as leverage to take a wicked steamy dump while making aggressive eye contact with me and a few other passengers. Hey, when you gotta go, you've gotta go, man. I gave my ex a ride to his court hearing for hitting my daughter. I pointed out to him that inside there was a sign that said no cell phones, and that I would run our phones out to the car and be right back. I felt like my heart was going to break my sternum, and I had tunnel vision as I had called my sister and told her I needed her and her husband to come with their pickup truck to my house right now because I had a small window to get as much of my daughter's and my possessions out of my house before he was released from court. Just as we were wrapping up, I saw him running down the street like Usain Bolt right for me. I yelled for them to drop what they had and get in the truck and go. Just as I close my car door, he runs and tries to smash it open. I fumble with my keys to get the engine started. He then stands in front of my car, blocking my path. I dismissed my burning desire to run him over and threw it in reverse and smashed the gas pedal down the block to the next street. I'd like to say things got better after that, but that was just the beginning of the worst year of my life. Now I'm past all of that and living a better life. I was at a marketing recruitment presentation in college, and this guy started talking about how we would be able to go to Disneyland and buy Ferraris if we just signed up for his exclusive elite program. We just had to make a small down payment right there in the auditorium, and we shouldn't talk about it with friends or family because haters online had damaged the company's reputation. It was Amway, and the guy was Charlie D'Urso. Was in New Orleans interviewing for a job that required driving a company vehicle 10 hours a day that had valuable specialty equipment. Interview is going great and we get to the part about pay. Guy goes, "We can offer you $10 an hour." A big smile came over my face and I leaned over to shake his hand. He thought I was agreeing. I was telling him bye. Popeyes pays around $15 an hour here. My mum was content living with bedbugs, a creepy 50-year-old man who might pay our bills, as well as his kids and our cousins, all in a crappy mobile home that she hadn't been making payments on. It was in such bad shape, it wasn't even worth repossessing. I could never have any time to myself. I was always surrounded by bratty kids while constantly scratching at the bite marks the bugs had left. I'd go to bed at night wearing sweats with socks on hot nights just to try and keep the damn bugs off me. It didn't work. When I was around 14, I went to go live with my grandma. Of course, that made me a backstabber in the eyes of my mum, but she's not relevant in my life anymore. I pulled into a gas station to fill up my car at 4 a.m. on the way to work. The station was well lit and actually pretty busy, so I didn't feel unsafe. I pulled up next to a pump, got out, and just when I put the nozzle in, I heard someone trying to get my attention. He asked if I could call his girlfriend to come pick him up. I called one number, voicemail box full. He gave me a second number, mailbox also full. Then he asked if I had jumper cables and if I could give him a jump. I agreed, thinking the van he was nearby was his vehicle. Then, after I agree, he tells me the story of how he got there. According to him, his car had broken down at another gas station up the street. He said it was closed, so he couldn't get any help. So he borrowed a bike from someone and rode it down to this gas station. Then he went into the gas station to leave the bike there. As soon as he started walking away, my brain started racing and pointing out all the things that didn't add up about the story. First, all I could imagine in those voicemail boxes were a bunch of people going, "Your boyfriend is stuck at a gas station." Then I thought about how in the hell he would legitimately borrow a bike from someone at a closed gas station, in the middle of night, in the middle of winter. At that point, I decided it was time to get the F out of there. Thankfully, I hadn't pumped any gas yet, so I quickly put it back on the pump, got in my car, and tore out of there. I actually felt a little bad because what if he actually needed help? But then I reminded myself about him borrowing a bike in that situation, how he was trying to get me to a dark, secluded secondary location. This dude was absolutely trying to rob and murder me. I was visiting London and just got out of a sports bar by myself at 3 a.m., drunk as crap. I decide to walk from the bar, near Leicester Square, to my hotel, near King's Cross, despite not knowing exactly where I am or how to get to the hotel. I start walking in a direction, and within a minute I'm walking down a rather wide shopping street, when I see two bald guys coming the other way, both pretty much built brick crap houses, and looking like they want to start crap. They hadn't spotted me yet, but one guy suddenly walks to the side of the street and just flat out punches the steel grate in the front of a shop entrance as hard as he can. I pretty much did a straight 180, double-timed it back to the bar, and asked the nice bouncers to get me a cab. Cab drops me off right in front of the hotel, and I go to bed without getting the crap kicked out of me first. Although it's entirely reasonable that those large, shaven-headed gentlemen were simply steel-grate integrity enthusiasts, I don't blame you for noping the heck on out of there. I go to school in Poughkeepsie. One time my friends and I were walking along some train tracks by the river on a foggy night. Not smart. We could barely see 5 feet ahead, but we weren't afraid because it was a popular hangout spot. All of a sudden, we hear a loud barking and a flipping crackhead lunges out of the fog at us, barking like a dog. The fog around him cleared up and we could see more druggies lying under some leaves by the side of the tracks, watching us and laughing. Never ran so fast or came so close to crapping my pants in my life. When my now ex-husband called me to tell me the reason he was late for dinner was because he was arrested for pleasuring himself in public, I got out. I'm too old for that crap. My husband came home from a business trip early yesterday and failed to mention it to me. I heard someone jiggling the doorknob and sprinted out the back door. Not getting murdered in my own house. This was like 5 years ago. I was 24 years old, got way too drunk at my local bar, and ended up going back to this guy's apartment. It was decorated by someone's grandmother for sure. There were candelabras everywhere. He lit all of them. Then he sat me on the couch and proceeded to go through all of these old family photo albums, specifically looking at pictures of his siblings and cousins as children. No joke, he was getting so hard that I could see the album start moving up and down. Then he asked me if I had any pictures of when I was a child or my siblings when they were children. Never sobered up so fast and booked it right the F out of there. Because I get replies about drunk driving, this was NYC. I walked 16 blocks through East Harlem and never felt so safe in my life. Oh boy, I have another one. My ex-best friend convinced me to go to a concert with her. I told her I couldn't because I had a long drive the next morning and I didn't want to waste gas or go to bed too late, and she said it was fine. She would drive and would get me home right after the concert. Went to the concert, it was fine. I was ready to go home, but she told me she really wanted to go to an after-party with the band because her crush would be there. I agreed because she really wanted to get with this guy and the chances of it happening seemed high, and I wanted her to be happy. Turns out the after-party was at a decent hotel. Underage kids were straight up walking in with handles of alcohol, and it was really obvious what was going on. The receptionist was eyeing everyone, but nobody gave a frick. My friend and I got to the room. We were the only girls there. Around 40 drunk college guys and 2 girls both under 110 pounds. I'd never experienced being looked at like a juicy steak until that moment. I told her we had to go, but she was hell-bent on staying with her crush. I couldn't convince her, so I called my mum, the most awkward phone conversation of my life, and had her pick me up. Turns out the receptionist called the cops soon after I left, and the party got broken up. I think some people got charged. Last week, I was visiting Los Angeles with my 22-year-old daughter. I had to fill the tank of the rental car. I googled the cheapest gas and waited in line. There was a scummy homeless man yelling, clearly mentally ill. When we got to the pump was broken. You know, when you fill 10 cents of gas and it stops. It took me a full minute to get $1 of gas when the homeless man came up to us. He was yelling, "Now this is a nice car." I grabbed the pump from my daughter and said, "Hit the road!" And we drove off. Funny thing is, my daughter wasn't scared because she was listening to what the man was yelling about. Apparently, the homeless man was being harassed by another driver. The other driver told him not to touch his car. The car was a piece of crap, and the homeless man was making fun of him like, "Oh, don't touch his car. Your car is a piece of crap." That's when he came to our car. "Now this is a nice car. I won't touch this one, but yours is a piece of crap, you butthole." So it ended up being pretty funny. I panicked for nothing. You may have already worked this out, but the narrator had to tone down this individual's language quite a bit so that this video wouldn't get demonetized. I told this once before, but when I was about 8 years old, I was in the car with my parents. They were arguing, which they did a lot, but being trapped in that metal box with them, both of them screaming back and forth, became too much. We stopped at a red light and I unbuckled my seatbelt and got out of the car and started running. My mum, who was in the passenger's seat, ran out after me, and after he pulled over the car, my dad did as well. They caught up to me and their attitudes completely changed. They promised they wouldn't fight again, a promise they broke time and time again until their divorce, but they never did it again in the car. I was at a baseball card convention when news of the incel van attack in Toronto broke. It was a slow afternoon, so a group of us dealers gathered around the lobby TVs to watch, and the other guys started defending him. If he had been an Islamo-terrorist, the frickin' media would have kept that crap under wraps. And, what do you think's gonna happen when women only go for jerks? Then the egghead in our group argued that those with less access to women suffer just as much as those with low incomes, and that we should re-educate women to find those men with low sexual market value attractive. I did not want to find out what he meant by re-educate, so I packed up my cards and left. Yes, the women are the problem, not the murderer. Thank God these guys aren't reproducing. Happened a few hours ago. Was in the park with my younger brother just playing football, having a nice time. Suddenly, I see a man looking over in our direction. However, I can't be too sure because I don't have my glasses and I don't want to scare myself for no reason. He's carrying an orange bag, so it's easy to see him. I ignore him and brother and I start walking around randomly. Not following the path, backtracking, just not walking logically, if that makes sense. Kicking the ball to each other. The last time I went to this park on the 1st, a man of the same build and ethnicity followed me, so I felt myself getting paranoid. This man kept his distance, but for instance, we went into the basketball area and he would come to the entrance and lean against the grate, just watching us. He could go behind the trees, it wasn't clear he knew his way around the park, and follow us, which I wouldn't notice if it wasn't for his bag. I wanted to confront him, but I was with my younger brother and didn't want to cause trouble. I wasn't really scared, but more angry and frustrated. The man suddenly starts getting braver and walking faster towards us, so we decide to quickly run home, even though we were only out for 15 minutes. I was at home working on a gate outside. I heard my neighbor shoot off some rounds, so I went to a spot I'd be able to overlook the pond and see if they were getting any of the geese. Then 3 shots came through the bushes right towards my house, roughly 100 feet or so away from me, not towards the pond. So I was like, okay, they're being an idiot. Time to GTFO. I go back to working on the gate about 300 to 400 feet from where I was when I was being stupid and nosy, even though they should not have been firing towards a house. Then a fricking bullet cracked as it went less than 5 feet past my head. Yep, that's when I said, frick this, hid behind a huge-ass tree and called the cops, and waited 45 minutes for them to show up. The guy that I met. College-educated, handsome, retro digs in Long Beach, California. Articulate, funny, packed a picnic for our blind date, complete with cloth napkins. Went back to his place, and the kitchen was a hoarder's dream. At least 6 full sets of dishes, dirty, sitting in neatly stacked piles everywhere. Pots and pans, the same thing. Hundreds of dollars worth of iron cookware, stacked on the floor, rusting. Instead of washing dishes, he would buy more. Noped the F out. I told you I was planning on selling them in bulk. One man's trash is another man's treasure. I have leukemia. I completed 5 months of chemo in October, but my white count has been low since then, so I am high risk of infection. My wife just gave birth a few weeks ago, but had severe preeclampsia and had to be put on blood pressure meds. I went to pick up dinner, and on my way home, I figured I'd also grab her meds at the pharmacy real quick. Except a ton of people had the same thought, and I found myself like 20 people back in line. I was set to wait. Wife definitely needed her meds, until I hear coughing. I look up and a 2-year-old kid is hacking everywhere. That is no bueno for me. Yep, I had to nope the hell out of that line and send my mother-in-law to the pharmacy for wife's meds. In conclusion, I'm a 35-year-old, tattooed, bearded man afraid of small children. I was at work and thought I needed to fart. Turns out it was diarrhea and made up an excuse to leave for the rest of the day. I have also accidentally crapped my pants at work. I had had some weird coughing fit and diarrhea. I didn't make up an excuse. I told my manager I just crapped my pants and I'm going effing home. He just said, "Feel better." When I first moved to where I'm living now, it's across the river from a college town/city with a main street that is littered with restaurants and bars. So one night, a couple of friends and I went out and decided to bar hop. Nothing crazy, just wanted to check out the different places. Walked into one hole-in-the-wall joint with only a handful of people in there. Everybody's head turned and looked at us like we were from another planet. Weird vibe immediately. Asking how we're doing and what he can get us. We order our round of drinks. Bartender very slowly says, "Is that all?" Again, weird vibe, but whatever. Random guy, later found out to be the owner, comes and sits next to us and starts chatting us up. Where we're from, what we're doing in the area, if we're cool. Lots of weird conversation starters. At this point, we want out, but our drinks haven't come back yet. So we get our drinks and try to keep to ourselves. Guy keeps asking if he can get us anything at all, off the menu. It's at this point that I realize that the two women at the other end are doing coke off the bar. There's also now two large men standing against the wall right behind us, just grilling us. Not wanting to make a scene, we all talked amongst ourselves for a minute, finished our drinks as fast as possible, paid and left. The owner was trying to talk to us the entire time we were paying and making our way to the door, trying to keep us there as the two large men slowly close in. We got the frick out and said nothing until we hit the other side of the street. Grabbing some Waffle House in a not-so-good part of town around 2 a.m. after work. Dude whipped out a gun and was screaming at the chick he was with. Definitely my most gotta get the F out of here moment. A few years later, got a job as a 911 call taker. Same Waffle House got shot up. So there is that. When I realized the shelter I work for is pocketing donated money, keeping and using donations for themselves first, taking their food, taking housing products, all for their own personal use. These people have well-paying jobs with plenty of overtime, benefits like health life and dental. So yeah, screw that place and screw those people. Sucks for the ones that do have to stay there. I'm black. I live near Alabama. A friend was having a party, but she was using a different friend's house as the venue. The house was deep in the woods, and this man at the gas station was being friendly and joking with us. Everything seemed fine until he said something like, "Don't forget the Klan meeting is tonight at 7. I'm kinda blacked out for a second because I'm sure he meant something else, but I got a bad vibe. A company I was working at got bought out by another company. They tried to make us sign agreements that we wouldn't work in the industry for 2 years after working for our company. So I'm not allowed to have a job in my field for 2 years if they lay me off. A bunch of us refused to sign it, but nothing happened. Then people in management started getting moved around, and they put someone in charge of me who was really incompetent. When a big company buys a small company with a lot of name recognition, I can see the writing on the wall. I got another job and got the heck out of there. What's your "I finally met my online friend" horror story? Back during World of Warcraft's second expansion, there was this guy in my guild I'd become friends with, mostly through other friends. We'd talked more and more over time and become fairly close. He had this butthole roommate and I could hear the guy sometimes, especially when something went wrong during a raid. He'd scream and throw fits. He was pretty awful sounding. My friend told me he wasn't just loud and obnoxious, but verbally and sometimes physically abusive too. I had my own apartment, so I said, "You know what? Come stay with me, just long enough to get you on your feet and into a place that's safe." He showed up at my place with a trash bag full of his stuff and laptop. I set him up in the apartment and started trying to help him find a job. Well, he did not want a job. He did not get a job either. He sat in my apartment day after day, eating my food and slowly draining my savings. No matter how hard I tried to get him motivated, he would just dig in his heels and somehow become more sedentary. Eventually, I told him he had to go. I couldn't afford to keep him there. He was just couch surfing. I spoke to some people and eventually pieced together that his method of securing a new, temporary place was playing on the sympathies of his friends to convince them he was in a terrible living situation. It just worked really well on me because he had that loud, obnoxious roommate to play off. He wound up calling a nearby relative to come and get him, I think his aunt. I don't know what he told her I supposedly did, but I have never seen a more venomous look from someone in my life. As far as I know, he moved in with his sister and brother-in-law after that, but frankly, I don't care where he ended up. He also stole a bunch of my stuff. First and last time I do anything like that. Met this dude on EverQuest and we played some games together ever since. Been a part of the same guild, help each other out on mobile games and have conversations about life in general. It isn't him that's the horror story. It was his mum. So one day, I think we were playing World of Warcraft at the time, I log on to do some quests. Suddenly his user comes on and asks to chat by video. We've done this before and there's no problem, but after I click to start the video chat, there's his mum butt naked on the screen. She asks me to watch her pleasure herself and I'm like, "No lady, this is awkward as F." And I log off for a few days. I get an email from my friend. He wants to know why I haven't shown up for quests or anything. So I tell him what happened and he's seriously like, "WTF. Turns out his mum had been doing this to a lot of his online buddies and eventually goes to prison for committing the unspeakable act with a minor or two. Buddy's still doing great though, wife and kids, plus we still play the occasional game together. I never actually met the guy but spoke to him on the phone. We'd met on MySpace when I was in college and exchanged email addresses when we realized we lived in the same town. Eventually, I gave him my phone number and made plans for him to call me. When he did, his voice creeped me out. It was how I imagined a serial killer would sound. By the time I got past it and was comfortable talking to him on the phone, I started noticing other red flags. Whenever I brought the neighborhood up, he changed the subject. At one point, I asked him what his favorite restaurant on the boulevard was, and he hedged. So I made up a restaurant that I said was my favorite. He immediately said that was his favorite too, and he especially loved one of their dishes. He went on and on about this wonderful place that didn't exist, and there wasn't a similar one in town, so he couldn't be confused. I called him out on the fact that he obviously had never been to my neighborhood. Turned out he didn't even live in the same state as me. It's like I don't understand what this person was actually trying to gain. Was he just that starved of human conversation? Guy I knew in college met a girl online and spent every day talking about her. She lived about 6 hours away, so he planned to take a semester off and pursue this relationship. He got a job in her town and asked if I'd help him move out there, since my car would hold more than he could take on the bus. I had a long weekend off and figured, why not? A road trip could be fun. I'd drive him out as a goodbye present, and the way back I planned to visit Yellowstone. Well, we arrive and it turns out he doesn't have an apartment lined up and he found a job posting in his girlfriend's town. He hadn't actually gotten the job, or even applied yet. I make a bunch of phone calls and find him a room to rent that will let him move in that day with just first, last, and deposit, even without a job. I'm tired and disgusted with his lack of planning, but figure it's worth staying the night and trying to end things on good terms with my buddy. Then he breaks down and confesses he hasn't actually met this girl. The nights he spent video chatting with her were really just him watching her vlog and jacking it. They've never talked, never texted, never even emailed. Hell, he's never even left so much as a comment or like on one of her videos. She genuinely didn't, still doesn't, know he existed. His plan was to hang out at this game shop she talks about until she showed up, and somehow create a relationship from that. He thought that they'd meet and she'd fall in love with him and move back to our college town to marry him, all before the next semester began. That didn't happen. Instead, I made my buddy buy a bus ticket for his ride back to school and left. He came back to school and got more cringy, not less. I lost track of him after that. I met a guy online and we really got on, and he came over a few times so we could hang out. I did find him attractive and tried to hint that I was into him. Note, I can't flirt to save my life. But nothing ever happened. After a few dates, he suddenly vanished offline. No social media, he wasn't answering texts or emails, nothing. I thought he'd ghosted me. After 6 months, he reappears. I asked him where he'd been and he said, "I don't want to talk about it." A few weeks after, there was a fad where people were Googling their names and posting humorous stories they'd found about similar people with their name. Mine was about a ship that had my initials, and I started to Google friends' names just out of boredom and morbid curiosity. Googled his name and found a local news story from his area, one of those crime and courts things that he had been done for statutory assault of a minor, online grooming, and had his computer and phone seized as evidence. When I was younger, I met an online friend in a public space for the first time. He was about my age and hadn't lied about that, so I guess I let my guard down. Anyway, after we walked for a while, I noticed he had led me down a dark alley with no other people. He then looked at me and said how he wanted to really commit the unspeakable act on me right then and there. Right after he had said that, my instinct kicked in and I ran as fast as I've ever run in my life, until I came to the train station. Here I jumped on the first train I saw and got the hell away from him. I'm not sure that's so much an instinct as correctly understanding language verbatim. Also, apologies. The particular subject of this video is just going to naturally entail a certain amount of online predators. This was way back in the mid-90s. Bulletin board systems were all the rage. I made friends with this guy from NC. He was friends with a bunch of us from my dorm, mostly females, which probably should have been a red flag, but I was extremely naive at the time. A couple months in, he mentioned that he was coming to our state for a wedding and asked if he could come by our college to meet everyone. It was agreed he'd sleep in my dorm room since my roommate was almost never around. Now, there was no discussion or thought of sex, but I was pretty excited to meet this guy and see if he was as funny and charming as he was online. Well, day arrives, dude shows up. I should mention that I and all my college friends were 18 or 19. This guy was 24. Or so he said. Guy looked like, and I'm not exaggerating, a cancer patient. Pale, gaunt features, long greasy pale blonde hair, except where he was bald on top, and just generally looked like he was about to die or he was dressed as a ghoul for Halloween. He insisted on hugging all of us. I was trying to remind myself that looks don't matter and that he was a cool guy despite his very unsettling appearance. But then, when we all started hanging out, things just got worse. He was asking really invasive questions of all of us, making weird comments to whatever was said, and just all around creepy and distressing. I was sitting on the floor with another friend and actively rocking back and forth from discomfort. I lied and said I had hurt my back and that sleeping on the floor helped, because that night he kept insisting we could share my tiny, twin college bed. Nope. Last time I ever met anyone from that site. I don't know if it's a horror story, but it's how I ended up where I live now. I played WoW for a few years with a pretty regular group, got to know them offline, and at one point, two of them, a couple, invited me to move across the country. At the time, I didn't have anything tying me to where I was, so I packed up and moved. Got out here, moved in with my friends, and everything seemed okay. My buddy was a long-haul driver, so he was always gone for days at a time. His girl would try to set me up multiple times with two of her friends at the same time. One in Minnesota. I ended up having a hard time finding work for a while, finally got a job though, and was putting some money away while helping watch their kids. Out of nowhere one day, my buddy accuses me of trying to fool around with his girl. Nothing had ever happened, but I had noticed her spending more and more time in my room when he wasn't there. I knew his history and his previous relationship had ended after she cheated with a friend of his. He wouldn't listen, so I got kicked out without any warning and they stole about $1,000 worth of my stuff and later moved. Ultimately, it all worked out for me. Cut the friend and his girl out of my life completely and moved on. Now I have a good job here, wife and kids. Said he was 14. Turns out he was 38. My parents gave him a stern talking to. Everyone in the replies is saying how he was a child molester and all that, but let me clear things up. He was always nice and friendly until I found his Facebook and saw his age, at which my parents had a mental breakdown. Was never allowed to play video games with him online again. Returning to this post later, okay, maybe he was. After college, I was playing a game called EVE Online. I was in a corporation with a dude who I thought was the coolest. He had sold stuff in-game for real-world money and had built a supercomputer. He had a smoking hot girlfriend and had pictures of them rock climbing doing some super cool things. He was also like a head chef where he worked, and since I was a chef as well, I had a little bit of a bromo crush on him. He told me after I graduated that he could hook me up with a manager job and all I had to do was move up there. I sold everything I owned that day at a pawn shop and bought a U-Haul and started driving. 1 hour before I got there, it was like a week-long drive, he called me and told me the job was no longer available and I shouldn't come. When he found out how close I was, he said to just come anyways. When I got there, I was completely blown away. They lived in a disgusting Section 8 apartment with 4 other people, in a 1-bedroom apartment. They had like 3 cats, which I'm allergic to, and a kid as well. Day 1, it was all illegal substances and partying. I did not partake. I was not enthused. Day 2, I went into the city looking for a crap job to survive. I got one. It was terrible. Day 3, my buddy tells me we're all moving out and into a nice apartment. Week 3, we actually move into a new apartment, and the first night in that apartment, he starts beating his smoking hot girl in front of their child. The second time he beat her, I called the cops. Him and his girlfriend immediately said I was the bad guy and that they were just loving each other. They had the cops escort me from the apartment. So there I was, 1,700 miles away from home, homeless at 2 a.m., and it's frickin' raining on all my things. Lars, you are a sack of crap and I hope you die of space herpes. Look, most chefs aren't crazy, spouse-abusing, illegal substance addicts. But as a guy who worked 8 years in hospitality, I will say that I met more chefs that fit that category than in any other field I've worked in. I've been active in numerous online communities over the years, and have been fortunate enough to hang out with many of the friends I've made there in person. There's only been one incident I couldn't cope with. He picked me up at the airport, which was very nice of him, and as soon as we got into the car, he started picking his nose. There's a lot that goes through your mind when you hop into a vehicle with someone you've never been alone with, and you immediately catch them 2 knuckles deep in their rostrum. I looked quickly away so that he wouldn't know I caught him and be embarrassed if he was trying to sneak one out before I noticed. If he did notice, he didn't seem embarrassed, so I relaxed a little. I guessed maybe he was so confident about himself and our friendship that he descended past caring if I saw him take care of a quick boog. Fine, sure. When I finally looked back at him, he was wiping his fingers across his dashboard. To this day, I'm not really sure what to think, but this guy spent the entirety of the few hours we were together scooping out boogers and wiping them off on parts of his car, or the table, or wherever it was that we'd stopped at. I realized I was being transported in a rolling booger shrine, and that there was nothing I could touch without needing to wash my hands. I was sitting on a crust of fossilized booger stuff. I had to be. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. He was a nice dude, but I wound up ollieing out of our visit early because I couldn't handle it. I don't consider myself a clean freak, but as wiping started to stack, it was all I could do to not throw open the passenger door and roll myself out into traffic to escape. I still wonder if I should have done or said anything to save him some grief in the future, but it didn't feel like it was my place, you know? What do you even say? He was driving cross-country with a friend. I said I had a couch or floor they could crash on if needed. He was great. She was an annoying cow. She hated everything, was annoyed by my cat, didn't like anything I had to eat or drink, etc. They were literally there for like 16 hours. I met a really cool group of people from a chat group website called XAT that lives in minimal distance away from me, like maybe 15 minutes, and the horror story part is that I was in my emo phase and probably made a lasting impact on their lives as a hot topic connoisseur. After 4+ years of playing World of Warcraft together and chatting, online and on the phone, he invited me to visit him in Australia. I figured it was safe since I'd known him for quite a while and had never gotten any weird vibes. No flirtation, no creeperness, nothing. 2 days into my very clearly stated platonic visit, he tried to commit the unspeakable act with me. I ditched all my stuff except for what I had in a small duffel bag and took off, traveling on my own for the 2 weeks until my flight home. A few months later, I received an unsigned postcard from the Gold Coast that just said, "Thinking of you," with a smiley face. Ugh. Obviously the first offense is worse, but that postcard is just… ugh. Not a horror story, but about a year after I made the move from Massachusetts to South Carolina, I was playing video games and a guy on my team talked about how he just moved into a house in the same area that I moved from. So I PM'd him and turns out he had moved into my old place and was playing in my old room with his desk in the same spot I had mine. Wow, this one isn't creepy, but probably the strangest one I've read so far. A couple of years ago, this girl messaged me on Reddit saying she had really connected with a comment I made about first seeing the ocean, because she had just gone through a similar experience. She was going to come down to Chicago to visit a friend of hers, and asked for suggestions of things to do. I gave her a bunch, and then we kept talking and finding out that we had more and more in common. We eventually started talking over the phone and text messages, and when she came down, we went out for burgers and beer. We kept talking every day after that, and I was really starting to like her. She said she wanted to come down to Chicago again if she could stay with me. I told her, of course, and a few weeks later she was here for Saturday and Sunday. Really, it was mostly just Sunday because she got in late on Saturday and fell asleep on my couch. The next day we went to the zoo and had a really amazing day. After that, we came back to my place and decided to go to the brewery nearby, which made a beer that had her name in it. We went there and then ended up bar hopping through until we ended up near the dive bar by my apartment. We drank and played pool there and eventually grabbed some to-go beers and headed back. I asked if she wanted to see the place by the river I liked to go and drink and think. We sat and eventually started making out and decided to head back to my apartment. We hooked up and then the next day went to the south side to get breakfast at a place she really liked near her friend's apartment before she had to drive back. We kept talking after that and I was planning on coming up to visit her in Detroit. But then one day she just ghosted me out of nowhere. Not as horrible as some other stories, but it was really crappy for me because I actually really liked this girl, and to this day I have no idea why she stopped talking to me. By the way, she's definitely not dead. We followed each other on Instagram and I saw that she was okay a bit after she ghosted me. I had a layover in Amsterdam and I met up with a buddy I'd been chatting with on Soulseek for years. Electronic music file sharing. He gave me directions to his work, we delivered a huge wheel of cheese to a church in the red light district, then got drunk and high in a bar. 10 out of 10, most Dutch experience possible in Amsterdam. Only horror show part was how tall Dutch people are and how they speak English. This guy was like 6'7" and his voice was high to match, and all loopy and sing-songy. Very hard to take seriously as a person. Dutch people have the worst accent, really. And I can know 'cause I'm Dutch. The narrator would like to sincerely apologize for his Dutch accent. I'd been chatting to a girl for quite some time and finally ended up visiting her house, about 50 miles away, for an evening of enjoying each other's company. We wake up the next morning to loud noises, which turned out to be her fiancé I knew nothing about, ripping a window off its hinges and climbing in as she'd locked him out. Locked the door and left the key in the lock. There was a strange car on the driveway, so he thought she might be in trouble. Alas, it was me in trouble, as this guy was huge and a bit upset at this point. I managed to talk him down and explained the situation, to then find she had called the police and accused him of breaking and entering. During the time the police were questioning him, I made my escape and hightailed it out of there. I had a guy profess his love for me, over Skype. He wanted to come see me. He lived in the UK, I live in the States. Okay, I'll include some backstory. I knew him for about 3 years prior. He was a fairly popular streamer at the time, and I was one of his viewers. Eventually became a mod for him. We started talking on Discord and then Skype. I was 20 at the time of this event. Except, I had a boyfriend at the time. I told him this. I told him that he was wasting his time and I have zero interest in him. He is still coming. I told him there was no time to see him as I had work and school. He says, it's fine. He will wait until I have time to see him. I told him not to come. He says he has his parents' blessings. So he came. He stayed in a hotel for 3 weeks while I had to deal with finals, work, and spending time with my boyfriend. I hung out with him twice, once with a group of friends and once with my boyfriend. He got mad because he said he wanted to hang out with me, alone, in his hotel room, and when I said no, he flipped. He said that because he flew over here, I should at least hang out with him. He flew back home to the UK a few days later and blocked me on all social media. In conclusion, dude travels from the UK to profess his love for me, is upset that I didn't change my mind. Why did I even meet him? I knew him for a long time. I thought we were friends. I thought that he would come and realize that I didn't have feelings for him if I said it to his face. I thought I could save the friendship. I never thought he would hurt me, but even then I was never alone with him, not even close. What's a rule that was implemented somewhere that massively backfired? My city has issues with loud bikes and vehicles, so as a deterrent, the city put up decibel meters that displayed how loud your engine is, similar to those signs that read your speed and display it to you. But instead of deterring anyone, people would pull up to those signs and rev the heck out of their engines to see who could get the highest decibel count. The city took the counters down within a week. I work in manufacturing and we get paid piece rate, so the more I run, the more I get paid. We also have a base hourly pay rate of $10 per hour, so whichever pays more, the hourly rate or the piece rate, is what we get paid for the day. On bad days, sometimes they bump us up to $12 an hour for the day, and when we train new people, we get paid $15 an hour to compensate for having to slow down or stop our machines to teach the new people. The big boss, my boss's boss's boss, came in last week. Now, he used to work the line like I do now, but you can tell he's living comfortably in his corporate life and has forgotten some of the bad parts of this job. He told my boss that we are no longer to receive training pay because, by his logic, if we're working with someone, we should be making more than $15 an hour anyway. And these past 3 weeks or so, we have been doing a lot of training. So a few of us got together at the end of the day and agreed, if they aren't paying us, we won't train people. We will teach the new people enough to make us some money and leave the training to the designated trainers. 2 people split between 15 or so new hires, but they make $17.50 an hour. The policy lasted 4 days. Buddy of mine told me about a happy hour promotion a bar ran close to his campus. Apparently the special was something stupid like 50-cent beers that lasted until the first person went to the bathroom. As he tells it, the first few weeks went without incident, but once it became more popular, people were going to extreme lengths to not be that guy, including wearing adult diapers. Once people tried to covertly pee in corners and trash cans, the bar cancelled the promotion. At my old job, someone abused lunch, so they made a few of them text in when they started and finished lunch. One guy specifically would text the start time, place he got food, his order in detail, the address, price, etc., even when he bought a snack while out. That stopped a week later. Good old malicious compliance, the greatest form of rebellion against an overregulated, lifeless workplace. Worked for a marketing firm that often locked you out of the building if you weren't back in your cubicle by the second your break was up. They revoked your break the next day as punishment. This is not legal here in New York State. They got into a lot of trouble. The organizers of the 1994 Caribbean Tournament Cup had a rather odd change to the rules for extra time. If a game was still drawn at full time, it would go to extra time, but the first goal scored would win. This is perfectly normal, the golden goal rule. What was different is that they ruled that winning this way would count as having won by 2 goals for the purpose of the tournament qualification, instead of just 1. Barbados went into a match against Grenada needing 2 goals to qualify for the main tournament. If they lost, or won by only 1 goal, Grenada would qualify instead. Under the regular rule, this would mean that if the match went to extra time, there would basically be no point in Barbados playing because even if they scored, they would only win by 1 goal and not qualify. But the 2-point rule would motivate them to play on. Sound good? Well, you might be able to guess what happened. The match looked like it was about to end with Barbados 2, Grenada 1. A win for Barbados, but not the 2 goals they needed. So Barbados deliberately scored an own goal in the last few minutes of the match, making the score 2-2, hoping to trigger extra time and a chance to score the magic 2-value goal. The Grenada players quickly realized they could do the same, score an own goal to make the match 3-2 to Barbados, which would have Barbados winning by only 1 goal so Grenada would qualify. But the Barbados players realized that too, and so they began to defend Grenada's goal. So for the last 7 minutes of the match, Grenada were trying to score a goal in either net, since scoring a goal against Barbados would give them 3-2 and they would win the match, and scoring in their own goal would make it 3-2 to Barbados, so they would lose the match but win the qualification, and Barbados were defending both. Amazingly, Barbados did actually manage to do so, successfully defending themselves while half of their team were defending Grenada's goal against Grenada, and then scored the golden goal in extra time and qualified. When Domino's said all pizzas would be delivered in 30 minutes or less or your pizza was free, all the delivery drivers kept getting in car accidents to get your pizza to you on time, so it wouldn't come out of their paycheck. It was a short-lived venture. My company has a strict no-alcohol policy. You can't begin work within 10 hours of having had a drink. So when there's a staff shortage and they need me to come in right away, guess who just cracked open a cold one? My work has an infraction system. If you're a minute late, that's half a point. If you're up to 4 hours late, that's half a point. So if you're going to be a minute late, you might as well be 4 hours late because it's the same penalty. For those of you who keep pointing out that you would miss 4 hours of pay, I know. My work is weird and lets you fill in missing time with a PTO at the end of the work week. We also don't get sick days. So you have to take PTO if you are sick, and even then you're likely to get points because you called in less than 24 hours before your shift starts. It's not an issue if you get half a point and don't get another for 6 months, because the first one will have fallen off by then. English law in Wales set the death penalty for stealing a sheep. Welshmen caught stealing sheep would claim to be making love to them. They would get a lesser penalty for bestiality. The consequence of this is that the Welshmen gained a reputation as sheep shaggers. A famous example from Freakonomics was when a daycare started charging a small fine for parents who picked up their children late. Instead of resulting in more on-time arrivals, the new policy actually caused more late pickups. This is because the parents were originally worried that a late pickup would be a significant burden on the daycare employees. But because the fine was so small, only a few dollars, they decided that it must not be a big inconvenience for the daycare. Alcohol bans at college football games has led to increased intoxication problems because fans are loading up before going in the stadium. Yep, funny how people turning up to a game loaded instead of gradually getting tipsy over 2 hours might have increased the occurrence of boozed-up altercations. Worked for a warehouse 4 days a week, 11 a.m. through 9:30 p.m. Monday to Thursday. They reiterated many times during the interview process that overtime was optional. My first day, my supervisor told me that overtime is indeed optional, but if you don't stay for overtime, then everybody else has to stay even later. So if you do leave on time, don't come back. Whatever. I didn't mind the extra hours too much, although a 10.5-hour shift is already long. But the bonus was that we could all go early if all the orders were done. As you can imagine, the good workers busted their butts from start to finish, cutting as many corners, good and bad ones, as they could in order to get out early. Normally, this ended up with us being able to leave around 15 minutes early, or on a really good day where the stars aligned, i.e. everyone showing up, we could leave as early as 7:30 or 8. However, leaving that early only happened once or twice a year at most. Overtime was every week. Every single Monday we would work until 2 a.m. 11 a.m. to 2 a.m. isn't ideal when you have no idea when you're off. At around 7 p.m. we'd start to get an idea if we're in for another hour or another 6. One of the genius new hires mentioned to the boss in the office how he was hoping to get out by 6. Oh, good. Apparently, the boss was thinking us leaving early was a common occurrence now and decided that no one was going to be leaving early anymore. Sweep or dust or whatever, but no one leaves until 9:30. All of a sudden, we were late every single day without fail. Why? We were working our butts off to get out early but failing every day and ending up on time or still late. By taking away our ability to leave early, everyone gave up working hard. Slow down, we got another hour left anyways. I'm not sweeping. Went from about 45 hours a week to 55. 13 hours every day. Nobody ever left early anymore. But nobody left on time either. Losses for everybody involved because the boss didn't realize that us leaving early for 2 days out of a year actually gave us the daily motivation to work our butts off on the other 360. In conclusion, boss put a stop to leaving early. No incentive to work our butts off anymore means paying overtime every day. I worked at Macy's one Christmas and found out the reason why you can never find anyone at the registers. It's because they don't allow employees to stand at the register, because it's intimidating. I can't tell you how many times I gave up trying to purchase something there because I couldn't find anyone to ring me up. One of the high-rise blocks I have to maintain has a sign saying, "Anything left here will be removed due to it being a fire risk." People just dump the crap there they don't want, like fridges and sofas, and by law, we have to take it. F me, right? To clarify, I have no authority to put up cameras as they are council blocks, and I'm a council worker that has zero help from management, because quite frankly, they don't give a crap because they don't have to remove it. Congrats, British taxpayers, you pay me to remove jerks fly-tipping daily. I'm sorry for the crappy human beings on this earth. The British government was concerned about the number of venomous cobra snakes in Delhi. The government therefore offered bounty for every dead cobra. Initially, this was a successful strategy, as large numbers of snakes were killed for the reward. Eventually, however, enterprising people began to breed cobras for the income. When the government became aware of this, the reward program was scrapped, causing the cobra breeders to set the now worthless snakes free. As a result, the wild cobra population further increased. The apparent solution for the problem made the situation even worse. Ah yes, bounty systems. Abused at the cost of almost everyone apart from the hunters themselves, nearly every time they've been introduced in history. Case in point. In French Indochina, there was a major problem with rodents eating supplies and bringing disease. Given the plentiful supply of cheap unemployed workers, the colonial authorities thought they could be used to kill the rats and bring their numbers down. The French had a somewhat racially prejudiced view of the work ethic of the locals, so decided to pay them per rat killed, rather than per hour worked. Each was compensated for every dead rat they handed over. A year or so later, the colonial authorities discovered the peasants had set up rat breeding farms in the jungle. Dry counties were meant to reduce the use of alcohol in certain areas, but they resulted in people who wanted to get drunk driving further away from home to do so, increasing the odds and frequency of drunk driving accidents. Also, many attempts to rescind dry county laws ended up getting countered by campaigns paid for by the bars and liquor stores that set up on the edge of dry counties, typically under the guise of religious messages. Yesterday in Kenya, our governor in Nairobi banned public transport from getting to town, so people had to walk long distances to work. And since we don't have enough pavements, people ended up walking on the roads, like 3,000, and there was a traffic jam that lasted for more than 5 hours. The next day, the ban was removed. Question 1. What was the goal of banning public transport? They thought public transport was the reason behind all the traffic jams and noise pollution, which is wrong. Easiest way to fix things is to inconvenience people with money and power. Washington State made it mandatory for schools to drop their room temperatures to save on electricity. The result? Teachers brought their own heaters into the offices, and use of electricity increased. Not a law. My school does this and have made it clear it costs $1,000 a day to heat our buildings. They dropped the temp and it can be 50 degrees Fahrenheit in the morning in my classroom. Everyone has space heaters, which are illegal by the fire code. Admin and maintenance freak out over it, but refuse to turn up the heat as they sit in their separately heated offices at a comfortable temperature. Not sure if it's still the case, as I graduated many years ago, but where I went to college, the hospitals had a thing where if someone came in with alcohol poisoning and they were underage, then they'd also call the cops. So of course, what happened was when underage kids really should have gone to the hospital, their friends wouldn't call an ambulance because of fear the cops would punish people. Luckily, while I was there weren't many deaths due to alcohol poisoning, but there were more than 0. I worked somewhere with a clean desk policy on Friday afternoons. The common way around this was that everyone would just sweep all their paperwork into an envelope, stick it in the internal mail, and then it would arrive back on your desk on Monday morning. At one point in history, the president of Paraguay tried to eliminate racism by making it illegal to marry someone within your own ethnic group. Needless to say, this was quite racist. You have to eat whatever you touch was a rule in my kindergarten which led to all the children touching all the food to call dibs on it. Head teacher at the school I worked at made it a rule that the primary-aged kids, 5 through 11, weren't allowed to run when they were out in the playground. That was fun to try and enforce. Let's not allow young children to run on the playground during their recess at school. What could go wrong? Why are the kids getting so fat? Middle school wanted to create a trash-free environment, so they removed the trash cans from the parking lots, halls, and cafeteria. Then just told the kids to toss your trash when you get home or in a classroom. The amount of litter skyrocketed overnight. After a week or so, they brought back the cans. Last summer in Sweden, bus drivers in some counties started wearing shorts due to the heatwave. After being denied to continue doing so by management, they started wearing skirts instead. Dress code policies had banned shorts, but not skirts. Okay, I lived in Sweden during that time and I never saw this. I desperately hope it's true. Gotta love that country. Air pollution became a big problem in the late 80s and early 90s Athens, mostly due to the number of old, heavily polluting cars on the roads. So the Greek government made a law where only cars with odd-numbered final digits on their number plates, 1, 3, 5, and 7 and 9, etc., could be driven on odd-numbered days, 1st, 3rd, 5th, etc., and only even-numbered cars could drive on evenly numbered days. Sounds great, doesn't it? They'll halve the number of cars on their roads, right? No, they doubled it. Everyone brought one old, highly polluting car that had an odd-numbered plate and another with an even-numbered plate. Nobody could park and the air was worse than before. A hotel I used to work for decided they were having an alcohol-free holiday party. This didn't sit well with the people who'd been working there for years and were accustomed to a full bar at the party. The staff parking lot ended up being full of people drinking in their cars, trying to get a good buzz to carry them through the party, and most people ended up getting way drunker than they would have done so. The party was a crap show. My friend had a non-alcohol wedding. Nearly everyone took fairy dust instead, completely opposite of the sober event the parents wanted. The previous school I worked at decided that all shirts needed to have the school name or emblem, which was a fancy letter E, on them to be dress code appropriate. That's all the handbook said. No clarification on how the name or emblem was displayed, or the color, or if it had to be permanently affixed to the clothing. The students hated the policy, and being in high school, looked for any loophole possible. They found one due to the lack of clarity of the handbook policy. The kids would make paper E's and pin them to their shirts. Thus, they could wear whatever they wanted, and by pinning the E to the shirt were still dress code compliant. I thought it was pretty genius. The administration did not. Explicit adult content being banned on Tumblr. If you look for why LiveJournal failed, you'll read that it was old and obsolete or new platforms were hipper. Nope, it did 2 things. Number 1, made itself harder to use with crappy new features. Number 2, it banned adult content. Wait, I thought weird adult content was all Tumblr was good for. If I want wholesome, pointless bullcrap, Pinterest already exists. If they took adult content off Tumblr, there'd only be one blog left called Bring Back the Adult Content. Catholic school. This school started out not having a problem with Harry Potter. Library had every available book at the time. Not all were even written yet. Some paranoid parent cried Satanism and witchcraft, so the school banned Harry Potter. Suddenly, Harry Potter books are an underground commodity. The school had a black market trade for new and used Harry Potter books, and things only got worse when expulsion was threatened for being caught with one. A new Harry Potter book was worth its weight in gold. Finally, the school had to go all the way to the bishop about the Harry Potter books, and he said, "No, the books don't really teach Satanism. What is all this about a black market book trade?" So the school lifted the ban and told the parents to cool it. Doesn't this happen in one of the Harry Potter books when Umbridge bans the issue of the Quibbler where Harry has told the truth about Voldemort returning? Suddenly everyone had to get their hands on it and read it because it was prohibited. I worked at a contract agency that works with Child Protective Services. CPS policy is to never tell the parents who called CPS on them, but my agency's policy was to always inform the primary caretaker if one of our social workers called it in. Obviously, this irrevocably destroyed our rapport with our clients. Imagine telling a parent you called CPS on them only to knock on their door the next week to listen to their concerns. The agency made an asshat out of us, and all potential for case progression was out the door. Stupid rule, if you ask me. A salon I worked at one day decided to drug test the hairstylists. Out of the 12 stylists, 11 failed. Their manager texted everybody the next day and told them to come to work. I'm a stylist and I say this to applicants all the time. If they drug tested, there wouldn't be anyone working here. No card games at school. When I was in elementary or middle school, Magic the Gathering and the Pokemon card game were pretty popular. Almost all the guys played and would get together after lunch to play before classes started again. Here is where it's important for me to mention that this was a Christian school. It probably didn't take long for a teacher, administrator, or helicopter parent to wonder what all the fuss was about. Sure enough, one of them probably got a hold of a Magic the Gathering card, saw art depicting a demon, and decided that this had to be the work of Satan to warp our young minds. Almost overnight, all trading card games were banned from school. Any cards would be confiscated until the end of the school year. Well, now you have several dozen prepubescent boys with about 30 minutes of free time and nothing to do. So we did boy crap. Ran around, pushed each other, went places we weren't supposed to, just overall got into mischief. All this time, they had a free babysitter that was keeping us all engaged, quiet, civil, all while reinforcing quick math skills and teaching multi-level problem solving. The next year, we got a new administrator and card games were allowed at school again. When I was in school in the era of Pokemon cards, if you'd tried to take ours away, there would have been a full-blown revolt. This school, if anything, got off lightly. When I worked for immigration, some bright spark decided that we weren't going to remove people who had been caught smuggling illicit substances from certain countries. They believed it was too risky to deport people who had failed to complete their jobs back to angry gangs. News traveled quickly, and within a few weeks there was a huge spike in smuggling. People were smuggling over illicit substances and immediately handing themselves over to authorities to guarantee they wouldn't get deported. In addition, dealers found it much easier to convince people to attempt to smuggle illicit substances because it was a win-win for all parties. The whole idea was scrapped pretty quickly. Not exactly a rule, but just last week my job thought it was a good idea to take away our electric cart pusher machine because they felt we didn't need it. The very next day, the place was absolutely packed and we couldn't get carts in fast enough. In an attempt to discourage surfing during work hours in 50s Australia, the government brought into effect a law which stated that any man surfing before 5 p.m. would have to do so in a dress. This prompted more people than would usually be surfing during the daytime to don their wives' dresses and head down to the beach and surf for the couple of weeks the law existed. Lawyers, has there ever been a time the opposing counsel accidentally proved your case for you, and what happened? My favorite is a story from Gary Spence. For those of you who don't know, he's a famous trial attorney. A witness on the stand was claiming that he suffered injuries to his arm because of a city bus accident. Jerry asked him to demonstrate to the jury how far he can lift up his arms after the accident. The witness makes a feeble effort of lifting his arm. Then Jerry asks the witness to demonstrate to the jury how far he could lift his arm up before the accident. He lifts his arm much higher. The jury laughs. The case is over. Domestic violence case where the husband beat the wife senseless. Landlord tried to evict wife for breach of lease due to the beating. Landlord claimed wife violated lease terms by allowing police to be called to property and causing a disruption. My argument was that as a domestic violence victim, wife is covered under the VAWA, and the property is HUD subsidized. Also, MD law offers domestic violence protections too. Landlord's counsel during his opening talks about how my client was beaten and the police were called and an ambulance, etc. I just stood there looking at him. When he finished, judge asked if I had anything to say. My response, "No, Your Honor, I believe opposing counsel has said everything that needs to be said." The judge smiled and ruled in my client's favor. Landlord can't evict a domestic violence victim. My family did foster care for a few years and we fell in love with the last girl we took in, now my younger sister. She was required to keep in regular touch with her emotionally and physically abusive birth mum, the intention being for them to eventually reunite. This woman was a horror. Every single time they interacted, she'd spend the duration painstakingly shredding my sister's self-confidence. My parents worked hard to establish a strong rapport and supportive environment, and she blossomed under their care. She's one of the most resilient people I know. When the state tried to return her to her mum, she didn't want to go, so my parents sued, I think, don't really know all the legal details, for guardianship. This seemed like it would be an uphill battle. Here we were, a family of randos trying to steal a kid from her rightful mum. We were really afraid she would have to go back and that her crappy family would systematically undo all the hard work she'd done rebuilding her self-esteem. Fortunately, her idiotic mum decided to represent herself at the guardianship hearing. I wasn't in the room, but I heard the audio recording later on, and it's incredible how thoroughly this woman shot herself in the foot. Some highlights. She kept trying to testify while cross-examining people. Would it surprise you to learn that blah blah blah? The judge called her out for this like 6 separate times and she just kept doing it. She would admit to various incidents of emotional abuse, but then tried to argue that it was all justified because her daughter was being a B-word. She'd ask witnesses, for example, "And wouldn't you be angry if your daughter did XYZ? Yes or no?" My personal favorite and best example of her proving our case. "It's absolutely not true that I hit my daughter with a wooden spoon. I only tried and missed. I'll prove it. I can show you the mark I left in the door frame." Needless to say, we won guardianship. My sister never has to see that awful woman again unless she damn well pleases. The Dunning-Kruger effect occurs when a person's lack of knowledge and skills in a certain area cause them to overestimate their own competence. This lady may be a walking, talking example of said effect, both in her capacity as a parent and a lawyer. I worked as an intern for a lawyer. Construction laws in France are quite strict in regards to the neighboring of historical monuments. The city was denying a permit for heavy modification of the house of our clients. They were arguing that because you could see the house from the church's bell tower, modifications were impossible. As a support, they kindly linked us a 360-degree picture from said bell tower. We, as kindly, pointed out to them that our client's house was indeed not visible from the top of the church. Building permit was greenlit the following day. Not a lawyer, but I am a former insurance fraud investigator. We were at a hearing before the WCB. I had something like 18 hours of video spread over a 2-week period of a claimant doing roofing work. The problem for me was that the video didn't get a clear face shot. Normally, what we liked to do was get in close, show the face for positive identification, and then zoom out. Bonus if the claimant was wearing distinctive clothing that could be easily tied to him. Because of where this guy lived, all I could do was show someone who matched his description getting out of a truck registered to him every morning. He wore a hat, he had a beard, and he had neither at the hearing. So the company lawyer is prepping me and basically letting me know to be on point because the claimant's attorney is almost certainly going to challenge the fact that it is his client in the video. If the video got tossed, the case was lost. About 2 minutes into the hearing, claimant's attorney agrees to stipulate to the fact that it is his client in all of the video. All of it. Our attorney was shocked. That was pretty much the only leg he had to stand on. Claimant attorney was incredibly smug right after this, like it was no big deal. Evidently, his strategy was to show that his client wasn't really a professional roofer since he was doing the roof the wrong way. He tried to get me to answer questions about roofing. I refused as it was beyond the scope of my work, and he just wouldn't let it go. After about an hour of back and forth over this, the judge finally said, Counselor, it doesn't matter if your client is doing the work well. What matters is that he has stated numerous times under oath that he cannot work. Whether he's doing it for free, for cash, or for fun has no bearing on the fact that he's doing roofing work while collecting compensation benefits, which he was awarded because he couldn't do roofing work. The guy lost and had to repay a bunch of benefits. After a few of those hearings, I began formulating a list of lawyers I would never hire and ones who I would absolutely want on my side. I had to go to court over a financial screw-up when I was a student. Took advice from the university legal support team who said I didn't need a solicitor, so I went alone. The judge didn't like this and postponed it for another date so I could prove I'd had more counsel first. The other party's solicitor caught me outside the court and said, "I didn't tell you this, but," and pointed out a huge error in the financial paperwork that made it very obviously come out in my favor. Went back to legal support, got confirmation that it was right, went to the second hearing alone and got the entire thing thrown out. The other solicitor winked at me as he left. Saved me about $9,000. Nice chap. Not a lawyer, but took my brother-in-law's landlord to small claims court. He's on SSI and I'm his conservator. We sued her for over $4,000 after she just decided she didn't like him and changed the locks on his apartment door. She also stuffed all of his belongings into trash bags and dragged them out to the curb. This was all done the day after she cashed his rent check. It all started because she was letting herself into his apartment with no notice and was going through his stuff while he was gone. When I found out about this, I told him to let her know that it was not okay. He did, and that's why she kicked him out. I'm very organized and presented the judge with a folder containing photos, receipts, short videos on DVD, and the sheriff call logs, as well as a concise timeline of events. The landlord showed up with her son and countersued for the exact same amount we were suing them for, claiming that the apartment was trashed, there were holes in the walls, and they would have to repair everything before being able to rent again. During the hearing, the judge asked for evidence of the damage to the room. The son whipped out his cell phone and showed a video panning and walking around the room. The video showed my brother-in-law's apartment obviously still being lived in. His stuff was all still there, and no visible damage, but there were a lot of posters and things hung on the walls. When the judge looked at the video, he asked, "Where's the damage?" The son replied, "You can't see it. It's behind all the posters." The judge frowned and looked at the video again and said, "Did you take this video when he was still living here at the time?" The son replied, "Yes." This was the clincher. The judge then asked, "Did you ask his permission to enter the apartment to take the video?" Silence. We were awarded the full amount. There is just something so deliciously satisfying about this kind of case. A bunch of dishonest, awful people being utterly destroyed for their dishonesty. I had a misdemeanor possession case I was defending. Client was driving his mum's car. He gets pulled over for playing the stereo too loud. There are pills in the center console, in a prescription pill bottle. The bottle has his mum's name on it. Client gets arrested and charged with possession of a controlled substance without a prescription. Case is obviously bullcrap, but the dumbest DA I've met in my entire life won't dismiss. We go to trial. During closing arguments, the DA says, "This case is a circumstantial evidence case." During my closing, I slap the jury instruction on the projector that says if a case is based on circumstantial evidence and there is one factual scenario that points to guilt and one that points to innocence, the jury must find in favor of the defendant and acquit. My client was acquitted. I had a hearing where the opposing party offered an updated contract that my client supposedly signed, except it was a horrible copy and barely readable. Then he assured the judge that the new same as the old contract, except for the party name at the top. The original contract was in his mum's name, the new one in his name, and the date of the contract itself. He made that assurance multiple times. After he exhausted himself saying how everything was the same, I then pointed out to the judge that half the provisions were different, and that my client had never signed that form. The judge asked if we were really accusing him of forging my client's signature, since that's a serious accusation. I held up the guy's prior conviction for contract fraud and said, "I absolutely am, Your Honor." We won, hands down. No further argument needed. My dad's ex-girlfriend took us to court over his estate after he kicked her out. Her claim was that she was entitled to half the pie due to the de facto marriage. She had mountains of evidence of her contribution to Dad's company and running the private estate. Expense reports, receipts, dates and times her and Dad proved their relationship with trips and combined spending, etc., etc. She had so much evidence, the judge took 4 days to look it all over, after which he came back and basically said, "Why the heck would you have all this if this wasn't your plan the whole time?" The case was very downhill from there. Okay, for some more clarification, she'd done the same thing to her ex-husband, giving precedent. He and her children said so in their testimonies. One of her children even inadvertently admitted she'd told them what to say and paid them for it. We were able to name the date the relationship between her and my dad ended, which was months before she claimed, and outside the time limit to make it de facto common law marriage. We had testimony from the doctor at his ICU who said she tried to keep everyone, including his ex-wife, our mother, and us, his children, away from him. Meanwhile, she had his phone and computer and was trying to take over his contacts and businesses. We had proof of this. Her lawyer was a moron who constantly contradicted himself and the evidence. He lost documents, gave incorrect dates, and asked irrelevant questions of the defense. In the end, it was that her expenses for the relationship were deemed normal for anyone in any kind of romantic relationship, that gifts and meals aren't claimable for compensation, and that her contributions to the household and business were not sufficient to warrant compensation. She never actually put any money into either, and that the relationship was not sufficient in duration to qualify as a common law marriage. This case took 4 frickin' years to settle, including 2 elevations of appeals. She finally gave up because she'd run into about $250,000 of court fee debt, as well as being forced to pay us $40,000. Not a lawyer, but was taken to court once. A guy had taken my family to court basically because he had been dating my mother, and things ended. Every cheeseburger, every Kit Kat. He even billed for things he did like house repairs. Some of the repairs were terrible and ruined other things. He tried to unclog the sink and ended up destroying the main drain pipe for the house. Now, he had bought some more expensive things as well. No one asked him to, but he was one of the types that loved to show how much money he had and would always talk about his connections, and would name drop someone anytime we went anywhere. So when he takes us to court with his full itemized list, the judge asks him to go first and present his testimony. He basically says, "While I was with them, I brought all this stuff. I took them to dinner all the time and all this, but it was the idea it would be paid back by them." Judge: "You brought a child a birthday cake with the idea it would be paid back. Did you ever say that these things were loans and not gifts?" Him: Well, no, but I shouldn't need to. That's the normal way people think." Judge: "Well, that's not the way I think. Case dismissed." Imagine having such a jaded view of your own kind of dating ability that you take precautions to do this kind of thing if people have the nerve to break up with you. Ugh. Relative of a retired prosecutor. Relative was working misdemeanor criminal court. Cases get called in alphabetical order, and 2 women named Catherine Smith and Catherine Smith, with a K, were scheduled to have their hearings before the judge. Not their actual names, but you get the point. Both had similar names, but slightly different. So the bailiff announces the next case to the courtroom. Catherine Smith, with a C, for 1 count of possession of white powder with the intention to sell, and 1 count of selling her body. So Catherine Smith, with a K, stands up and indignantly cries, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, just wait a second. Where the hell did the working girl charges come from? I may deal yayo, but I am not a working girl." Easiest illegal substance case my relative ever prosecuted. Actual lawyer here. From the Fool for a Client file. Was interning at Legal Services after 1L, doing discovery work for family law. My supervisor invited us to observe a hearing for our client, to get a restraining order against her husband. At the hearing, the client discussed various times he threatened her. The man, representing himself, interrupted and said, "Judge, I never said any of those things. If I had, she wouldn't be standing here." Restraining order granted. Not a lawyer, but here's a story from the burbs. My buddy's psycho neighbor built a wall too high and doesn't have proper drainage on his property for the very small creek/natural drainage in between their yards. My buddy hired an attorney as the psycho decided to sue him over it. My buddy's engineer looked over the property and noted not only did my buddy set his yard up right, but the neighbor created drainage problems. Neighbor hired his own engineer that proved my buddy was correct. Now the guy is likely to go postal. Case was going through to mediation. Since both engineers found fault with the psycho neighbor, my buddy decides he's going to take it to trial. Turned the tables a bit. I'm not a lawyer, but witnessed a pathologist win a case in court by destroying the defense's credibility. The question was over whether or not carbon monoxide poisoning could have caused certain signs of death in an individual, but the defense didn't study their chemistry very well and kept asking the pathologist whether carbon dioxide could have caused these signs. After thoroughly frustrating the defense by answering his questions incorrectly, the pathologist said very loudly, "Oh, I'm sorry, did you mean carbon monoxide? Because that's a completely different thing." Completely destroyed the defense's credibility in front of the jury. They were done after that. So I guess the opposing counsel screwed himself by not picking up a book. For clarification, this is not the only reason that lawyer didn't win. There were a lot of other things that didn't work out in his favor, but those were technical things that he probably knew about ahead of time. This was a case where he was asking questions that he thought were going to work out in his favor, but it worked out against him because he made a basic chemistry mistake that he honestly should have caught. Yeah, I know he's not a scientist, but you don't have to be a scientist to remember the difference between those two things. Getting terminology correct is a part of his job. It's not likely anyone caught a felony charge solely because he said that one thing wrong. A guy I used to work with was going through a messy divorce, about 20 years ago now. His soon-to-be ex-wife was a psycho, and her father was a psychologist, so he was pulling all of the strings. Even had my coworker arrested at work one day. Bullcrap charges. The divorce case took years, one young son involved, and at every turn my friend lost because of something the father filed for or another string he pulled. In the end, they were in court and it was very apparent that my friend was going to lose custody and all visitation rights. Every plea he entered was squashed and he was mentally broken. The judge asked the ex-wife if she had anything else to add, and she said she had a written statement that she wanted the judge to read. The bailiff took the paper from her and handed it to the judge, who unfolded the note and read it. He stopped for a minute and asked her if she was certain she wanted this note added to the case, and she said yes. The judge turned to my friend and said, paraphrasing, "Mr. Insert name here, all these years and all these claims that I ruled out against you, the court profusely apologizes. I did not believe you, but now I do. Ruling in your favor." Bangs the gavel. "I grant you full legal and physical custody of your minor child. Bailiff, please handcuff Miss Name here." My buddy was stunned that he won and happy at the same time. He later found out that the note said, "Give me my son, or I'll frickin' kill you." There you go, folks. Threaten the judge. That can only go well for you. You heard it here first. Not a lawyer, I know, but my parents were in a lawsuit where this happened. They owned a business, and on either side of it were other businesses. Their neighbors to the left sued us, claiming that they had been using their property without paying them or without permission, that we were essentially trying to adverse possess it. We got a surveyor to come in, and the surveyor said that not only were we using all of our property, but we had been paying rent to them on about 20 feet that was also our property. Obviously, they weren't happy, so they got their own surveyor, who gave us 50 feet. We won the lawsuit. Now, their little patch of property has a rusty fence all around it with keep out signs everywhere. It's about 20 by 10 feet. When I first started, my firm had me on a case where the client had claimed he lost because of ineffective assistance of counsel, basically saying that the old lawyer didn't do his job. So we prepare an argument based on not asking the right questions, not communicating, etc. We think it's going to be a tough case, but not unwinnable. Then we get the response to our complaint where the old lawyer argues that he was only ineffective because he didn't have time to prepare his case and only reviewed it the morning of the original trial. He had known about the case for months, by the way. The judge saw this, and during the trial, we had essentially asked, "Isn't this the definition of ineffective counsel? Not giving enough time to your client?" The silence from his side of the court was amazing. Needless to say, the trial didn't last much longer. Thanks, opposing counsel. I guess you were ineffective for both of you. Not a lawyer, but in a suit against an employee, her attorney presented our contract and their contract to demonstrate the differences to prove that his client hadn't stolen ours. Where did you get our contract? Idiots. We won. Spent a couple of $100,000, defendants both ordered to pay $10K, filed bankruptcy and dissolved business, started anew with another competitor. Life. Not my case, but I was in courtroom watching a trial. self-representing defendant who was accused of flashing a guard and pleasuring himself till, well, you know. As a pro se defendant, he defended himself at trial without an attorney. Prosecutor was doing well proving the case. When the female deputy was on the stand, the defendant asked her one question. If you saw me do what you claim I did, then how big is my member? The deputy responded by raising her hands and estimating about 15 inches. The guy grinned, turned to the jury and said, "Yeah, that's right," and sat down. Obviously, he was convicted. He was doing a 10-year prison sentence, so this conviction wasn't of much consequence, but I'll never forget it. Oh, I've got one. I was about 5 when this happened, but my parents explained it years later. There were a series of trees on the sidewalk in front of each house on the street. Although they were not part of our yard, the tree was owned by my parents and they were responsible for it. Some guy tripped over a branch and was seriously injured. He came after my parents for all of the money. The dude showed up with a mountain of evidence. Hospital bills, psychologists' testimonials, a photo montage of his slow and painful recovery, etc. Apparently, his lawyer brandished this stuff like a bat before court. My parents' lawyer thought he had a good case. Until the first day of court, when he walked over with a picture and asked, "Is this your tree?" My parents looked at the photo in disbelief. No, that is actually not our tree. The opposing counsel repeated the question. It went back and forth a few times until my parents' lawyer incredulously produced a picture of their tree, which was, even to the untrained eye, a completely different tree. At that point, the opposing counsel whirled around and started screaming at his client, "You said that was their tree!" Case summarily dismissed. My parents walked out in shock, came home, and bought me ice cream. All's well that ends well. What is the most embarrassing way your body has betrayed you? I danced classical ballet for years when I was younger. One day when I was 12, we were doing a stretch where we were lying on our backs with our butts scooted to the wall and our legs stretched towards the ceiling. We would let our legs fall into the splits, letting gravity assist us. So we were lying there, listening to quiet piano music, my legs wide open, and the girl next to me was whispering jokes and making me giggle. I could feel the onslaught of explosive gas happening, but being young and stupid, I was afraid to close my legs because I thought I'd get into trouble. So I ripped the loudest, most terrifying toot to ever exist. I think I blew a hole in my little pink leotard, I swear to God. The room was a huge wooden studio, so that expulsion from hell was bouncing off the walls for like 15 minutes. All the little girls started screaming. I was screaming. The teacher was probably screaming. Still gives me nightmares. I stood up from sitting at work and screamed in pain because I got a cramp behind my nuts. I don't know how to explain it, but that's where I felt the pain. My co-workers were dying of laughter when I explained what my scream was. In 6th grade, I got hard for no reason and then was asked to go hand something to the teacher. When I stood up, this girl that sat near me stared right at my nethers with wide eyes. I'm just thankful she didn't tell anyone or I might not have heard the end of it. Last summer, I tripped over something while walking on the sidewalk. Happens every now and then, no big deal. It normally just looks like a funny skip or something, except this time I kind of leaped forward into the air. And somehow the normal response message to put my hands before me didn't reach its destination, so I just dropped onto the ground like a human sack of potatoes. It was equally painful and embarrassing. Still don't know how the crap that happened. I was sitting on the floor in my cheap wooden condo and let out a huge guff of wind. Dog in the condo below me started barking, and I could hear the cute girl who lived there and her visiting parents laughing. A note from the narrator, this video has been a matter of spreading out the toot stories which, surprise, comprise the majority of accounts from this forum. Struggle on, my fellow gaseous humans. One time I was really sick. So I went to throw up in the toilet, and as I started throwing up, I simultaneously started pooping myself as well. Once you start throwing up, you can't exactly stop until you're done. So I just kept throwing up while crapping myself for the smelliest, most uncomfortable 5 minutes or so of my life. Ever since I stopped being able to throw up like a normal person, I'm always scared I'll crap myself, so I sit on the toilet bending over a bucket, even though it's harder to throw up that way. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this trip down memory lane as much as I did. When I was in high school, by starting a period without any of the usual symptoms and leaving a bloody puddle on the chair and huge stains on my jeans. This happened to me, and a boy I had a crush on told me about it, because I didn't realize. He asked me to go to the bathroom, he went to the admin office, got me a pair of track pants we used for PE, brought it to the bathroom, and got them to clean up the chair. Never told anyone that I know of. I was way too scared and embarrassed to ask him out, or ever really talk to him again. In a meeting with my managers, they're complaining about X, Y, and Z that I haven't achieved. I'm not upset about the criticisms. If anything, I'm angry I have to hear them. But for some bizarre reason, my eyes started watering. We'd have these meetings weekly, and every time my eyes would water and tears would pour. It started just happening when I wasn't even angry. And even in normal angry situations, I'd never tear up. Just in those meetings. When I was 12, my best friend and I were hanging out in front of my apartment complex on the front step with two guys that we were super interested in. I was sitting on the top step with my bestie, and the two guys were goofing off farther down the steps and making us laugh. Well, I started laughing. So hard, in fact, that during one of those laughs where you're laughing so hard you're no longer making any noise, where you've basically lost control of it and can't stop, I started tooting really loudly. Even though I was mortified, I could not stop laughing and laughed harder, and then I started peeing my pants. I couldn't stop. The pee was running down the steps as I tried desperately to stop laughing by covering my ears and shutting my eyes. I finally gained control of my body and stopped laughing, but it was too late. My crush came over to sit next to me, and right before he sat down next to me, he saw the puddle of pee and jumped up in alarm and said, "Whoa!" I got up and tried to run inside, but I didn't have my key, so I had to ring the buzzer and had to wait for my mum to buzz me in front of them, with pee-soaked pants and the giant puddle of my pee that had run down half the steps. I stayed inside the rest of the day, and that night, my crush miraculously came back and asked me out through my bedroom window. Good God! How good was the joke that you experienced such a total loss of control? How did the trauma of your bodily evacuations not sober you up and stop you laughing? At least it seems to have humanized you enough for your crush to get brave enough to ask you out, so that's something. 2-hour train ride. I felt the air coming slowly, but I held it back until the end. Finally, the next stop was mine, so I stood up and walked to the door, still holding back that, now massive, amount of air in my colon. Just when the doors were about to open, some child stumbled into me from behind. It surprised me so much that I, just for a moment, didn't hold in. The result was the loudest, most disgusting butt blast you could ever imagine. I never left the train station faster in my entire life. Storytime. My grandmother was killed when she received the AIDS virus through a blood transfusion back in the day. Know that my grandma was the one that ate the bullet that makes hospitals screen blood. My family donates blood on her birthday. I hate donating blood. I hate needles, I hate seeing blood, and I hate the weird cold feeling you get through your entire arm. In a terrible twist of fate, I happen to have universal blood that is CMV negative. I can donate to babies and small children, which is apparently rare. Hospitals are always in short supply, it seems, as I am always getting calls to donate a double amount every time I'm eligible. I charge them twice as many cookies as they give to other people. One time, after giving a double dose, I was feeling just fine. I usually feel wiped out and need to go to sleep, but that day I was feeling fine. I got home and the wife was there, and we're trying to have a kid and we were both kind of flirty, so we went for it. I got in the buff when my knees wobbled, the room spun, and I just collapsed on the floor. I never lost consciousness, I was just sprawled naked on the floor, unable to lift my arms or legs. I could loll my head about. Don't try to have a romantic time after donating a double dose of blood. My husband was annoying me the other day, and I tried to toot on him, and I crapped myself. Not sure if it's just me, but if a girl is going to sit in my lap, I will get immediately hard. I don't go around trying to get girls to do this, but I have had a few insist and then call me out for being a pervert when I tried my best to persuade otherwise. Santa? Looks like you should change your name to Meat Uprising. When I inadvertently spit on the monitor when I'm trying to explain something to someone. Dislocated hip while having adult fun times. Twice. I once went to school when I felt really sick. Within 10 minutes of me being at my school, my stomach started cramping, and I informed the teacher I was going home. It's about a 10-minute drive with my bike. Every time I went over the littlest bump, my stomach started hurting really bad. Not even 2 minutes of me biking to my house, I stopped to throw up. I threw up so bad that I started crapping my pants. A lot. Some of my friends started driving by, but I don't think they noticed me. I call my dad, who didn't have any way of bringing me home. He did, however, have a scooter. He comes along and I tell him I need to go home, but not on the bike. He tells me there's no other way, so I get on the bike, with crap still in my pants, and we drive home together. Not being able to burp or toot when I want to, but becoming a grandmaster butt trumpeter when most inappropriate. Was hanging with my boyfriend at his parents' house and was in his room, and we were just being silly, and in a moment of silence, I tooted for the first time in front of him, super loud, and at that same moment his mum walked in and silently turned around and left. He starts laughing at my super shocked face and the situation, and then I let out another slow, drawn-out, loud toot. It was hilarious, but oh my gosh, it was embarrassing at the time. It only happened like maybe 6 weeks ago. Just look at my fricking username. Thank you for your contribution, dear username I only have one hand. Honestly, entirely my own fault, but I drank too much one night and had a 3-hour train ride the next morning while completely hungover and nauseous. While in the train, I felt the need to throw up coming again, so I stood up to move to the toilet on board. This new modern fancy train had automatic doors on the toilet, and I couldn't figure out where the button was to close them, so I'm frantically trying to figure it out while suppressing my vomiting as much as possible. This sweet old lady who was sitting near the toilets noticed my trouble and pointed out the button to me, so I thanked her and closed the door and went. Very audibly. I didn't dare to look her in the eye when I walked by in shame. Brain. Let's have a seizure. Bladder.
Awesome! This is as good a time as any to pee yourself in front of everyone.
I am 30 years old. Last year, I pooped my pants. Full on. It was traumatic, shameful, and embarrassing. Be skeptical about any sounds your guts are making, people. My girlfriend and I went out one night to our local bar that does a wing night every week. It's our favorite bar, but also one of the only bars open all winter in our beach town, and wing night being the most popular night, we had to wait for a table for a while. Usually, we get 1 beer each during weeknights, but that night we had a lot more while waiting for a table. So after quite a few beers, some hot wings, and a night of all settling, the next day it needed out. I was at work, just me, my boss, and the head of all the offices in my state, 5 offices. I took one of the biggest dumps of my life and clogged the toilet the worst I ever have. 20 minutes with the plunger, I had to admit defeat. I told my boss, which was embarrassing as hell because she's pretty attractive. She called some plumbers, but none of them could come out that day, so I went back for another 15 minutes trying to get it to flush. I called it again, and the 3 of us left early since we only have 1 toilet in the office. The plumber came the next morning and got it cleared. So long story short, I ate too many wings, drank too much beer, and cost the company $150 the next day to unclog a toilet. In the womb, my lungs said, "Screw you," and have yet to cooperate 2 decades later. It's really cute when I can bench press 60 pounds, I'm a petite female, but I need a break after 2 flights of stairs. At a movie night with some friends and girls in high school, I somehow coughed and sneezed at the same time, and a huge snot rocket flew out of my mouth and onto the blanket. Very rarely I am walking and either one of my legs will just give out for like half a second. It's never enough to fall or anything, but it does make me look like I don't know how to walk or that I may be drunk. When trying on an engagement ring in a jewelry store, my finger swelled so much that I couldn't get it off. Even with lube applied by the store, it wouldn't go down. The ring just seemed bonded to my finger. I still remember feeling embarrassed when the jeweler smiled and said, "It's a good sign. This engagement ring is already married to your finger." The ring was eventually removed by soaking my finger in ice water several times to reduce the swelling. I have irritable bowel syndrome and get really insanely distended stomach full of gas when I eat certain foods. It looks like there's a basketball under my skin and it's all gas. My boyfriend of a year or so knew about my IBS, but hadn't really experienced the worst of it. One day we were hanging out at my apartment and I had my big gas belly. He knew what that meant, so I excused myself to my room to try and toot some of it out. He decides to come in to show me something on his phone as I'm laying on my bed with my knees up, trying to coax the gas out. He starts laughing at the sight. I start laughing. I feel an epic release of gas coming and I try to tell him to leave ASAP, but I'm also laughing. Between the laughter and the position I was in, I couldn't hold it back. I let out the loudest, longest toot in history. At first he laughed in surprise, then as it kept going on and on, his face changed from laughter to surprise to shock, mixed with what looked like a twinge of sadness. Watching him go through so many emotions right on his face just made me laugh harder, so the toot just kept going. After what feels like an eternity, he steps out of the room, hands over his mouth. He comes back in, and the butt blast is finishing off with a final toot toot toot. He is speechless. The first thing he says is, "I feel like I lived 80 years, died, and then came back to life again before that toot ended. I just don't understand how it was so long and steady, and then it got all Louis Armstrong at the end." And that's how he started calling certain trumpety toots Louis. Also, we moved in together a few months later, so my butt performance didn't deter him too much. Well, ladies and gents, I told you there were going to be a lot of stories on bowel movements, but believe me when I say I have actually reduced their representation in this video compared to the original forum post. Was on holiday in Fiji a few years back with the missus. We were playing rugby with some younger kids down the beach, and I wasn't feeling the freshest from a few to too many tequilas the night before. Wearing nothing but sports shorts, I got past the ball, partially crapped myself/sharted, and then hit legs, like it was a race between me getting back to the room before it made its way completely down the back of my legs. Grabbed the room key from the chair our things were on, dropped the shorts, and ditched them midway up to the room, up the stairs and down the straight for what felt like a effing lifetime. One trying to secure my privates, while the other held the room key for dear life. All while politely saying "bula" as I ran past everyone, somewhat covered in my own poop. Had a killer metabolism until 27. After that, I grew a belly even though my diet didn't change. I actually ate pretty healthy, and didn't drink alcohol, sober for 8 years, and exercised pretty regularly. I can blame my dad's genes for that, even though my mum's side of the family is as skinny as a rail. I was standing in the checkout line at Target getting myself a drink and a little snack because I hadn't eaten anything yet that day, and started feeling kinda crappy because of it. I got in the shortest line, and then my mum and daughter started talking to the cashier about how something should have been on sale. My hearing starts getting staticky, and my vision is getting dark, and I'm bracing myself on the conveyor belt, just trying to breathe and play it cool. Mum and the cashier keep talking about the coupon, and I'm thinking to myself, dear God, how embarrassing. If they have to call an ambulance and I'm taken out of this place on a stretcher, I can never come to this Target again. So they keep talking, and I just decide to sit down on the floor because that's just what you do. And I'm sitting there with my head on my knees when this manager walks up and in a kind of angry, confused tone, asks me if I was okay, and I stand up and tell her, "Oh, yeah, I'm fine," and play it off to avoid drawing any further attention from myself. I check out, take my stuff and sit in my car in a cold sweat and realize I had never fainted before in my life, and that I can never go to that Target again. On the bus, 2 hot girls in front of me, I fell asleep and woke myself up with a really loud moan that sounded like, Didn't get laid. I didn't know what healthy eating was and ate as much as I could when I was a teenager. Now I have huge stretch marks for life. I can't go shirtless without feeling embarrassed. Dude, nobody on the planet, male or female, thinks stretch marks are horrible or unattractive. I speak for all of us when I say most of us don't notice, and the ones who do notice don't care at all. Getting whiskey wee-wee when hooking up with a smoking hot girl I knew. Had testicular torsion in the middle of performing a one-act play. Worst night ever. I coughed at work, which made my butt constrict, which tore open a hemorrhoid, which proceeded to soak blood through my pants. Had to leave work early that day. Friends, exploded butt isn't fun. Every time I get nervous or am in a bad and serious situation, I smile. Was working out at the gym a couple of years ago and decided to go do wind sprints on the basketball court. The basketball court is actually 4 courts lined up side by side with a walking and running track on the second floor looking down on it. This particular morning, the track was busy. After doing a couple of sprints, I noticed a basketball lying about 1/4 of the way down the court. So I, being all cool and stuff, started another sprint and bent down to grab the ball so I could scoop it up, dribble, and do a layup on the way down the court. My middle-aged, dumb self sprinted down the court, bent down and grabbed the ball, but was unable to correct to a standing position, so my momentum carried me to the ground where I slid on my stomach for what seemed like an eternity in front of all these people on the track above. To my credit, I got up and finished the layup. Middle age ain't fun, kids. Being pregnant and peeing myself a little every time I sneeze. First time hooking up with this guy I'd been lusting after for a while. No clue he was into it too, so double yay. Some, or all of, the drinks were had, and as a result my body completely refused to cooperate. No matter how into it I was in my head, or all he did to get me going, which was a lot and felt awesome, my lady flower stayed drier than the Sahara Desert. Late in my pregnancy, my body began producing a lot of relaxin, so my hips would constantly fall out of place. If I sat crisscross applesauce too long or sat with my hips below my knees for too long, I couldn't get up or walk for several minutes without help. So imagine my fury when I'm sitting on the couch eating some ice cream and my husband rips the foulest butt gas known to man and I can't effing escape. By growing a lump in my right testicle. Now I've had 3 strangers, read doctors, touch my nuts in the past 5 days, and I can still smell the lube from the ultrasound. Surgery is scheduled in 2 days to get the testicle removed. It's not ideal, but it's better than the alternative. I have to say the most embarrassing part is bringing it up to family, friends, and co-workers to keep them in the loop. I assure you no one wants to talk about your balls, especially removing one. My own father clams up and hasn't reacted at all like I thought he would. I go back and forth between being incredibly transparent and then shy or ashamed. Touch your bits, everyone. It could save your life. I believe either grade 4 or 5 it was my turn to present my space poster I made up. After a minute of talking about what I've done and learned, I unleash an ungodly sneeze. Wasn't a little boy, "Achoo!" This bad boy was something a grown dad would do. This sneeze has me standing in front of my class with 2 massive streaks of snot dangling out each nostril hanging by my chin. I'm very prone to nosebleeds that range from paper cut amounts of blood to full-blown severed artery amount. Typically, they come along randomly during the early parts of November when heating units are turned on and the air is especially dry. Anywho, I wait tables for a living at a fancy restaurant, so this can be an especially problematic few weeks as they can pop up randomly while chatting with a table. One night, I had a couple in from out of town who declined drinks because they were so hungover from the night before. I mentioned that I was also having a rough day from the previous night, and we shared an empathetic laugh with each other. My nose then started to bleed rather badly, resulting in the table thinking their server was a heavy user of white powder. Scientists, what do you know that would blow a regular person's mind? Geneticist here. Different people have different forms of various enzymes, meaning that medication is horribly, awfully imprecise and affects people differently. For example, some people break down codeine into morphine very quickly, which can result in a far too potent dose, and some people hardly break it down at all, so there's no pain-killing effect. Until very recently, there was no way to know but try it. The lab I worked in developed a way to record the vibrations a caterpillar produces when feeding on a leaf. We found that plants are able to respond to this vibration when it's played back to them. It not only primes their defenses, but they can distinguish this vibration from vibrations caused by wind blowing, insects walking on them, insect mating calls, etc., and they will not prime their defenses to those vibrations. In short, plants don't have ears, but they can still hear? Okay, and what's the point of responding? The caterpillar's eating it and the plant goes, "Man, that hurts," and the caterpillar keeps eating? It's more like the plant releases toxins for its friend caterpillar to munch on. Exactly, then releases pheromones to the surrounding plants of the same species to do the same, and sends further messages through the underground fungal hi-fi networks. Plants are sophisticated things and are far more complex and active than we commonly realize. Giraffes have to eat from trees that are upwind from other trees they eat from because they release pheromones to warn the other trees. Anything downwind goes into defense mode and releases chemicals that make the giraffe not want to eat from that tree. Funny that animals have to hunt their plants and find unsuspecting trees to eat from. My research involves Parkinson's disease, and recently there's been findings that contracting an infection such as the flu whilst having PD will make the disease progress much faster, as your immune system will kill the brain cells responsible, in a kind of accidental collateral damage response. So we're looking at how some anti-inflammatories could slow the progress of PD by stopping infections from taking their toll. Early days, but very promising. Just started a PhD in astrobiology. Does that make me a scientist? Looking at microbe behavior in low-gravity environments, it turns out that microgravity has a tendency to make them into these superbugs that are incredibly resistant to antibiotics. There's some worry that this will be a pretty big problem as human space exploration develops. Ah, lovely. Yet another reason for me to never go out into the dark, horrifying expanse of space. Honestly, I was already there, you didn't have to keep trying so hard, universe. Here's a bit of psychology, since the harder sciences are well represented in this story group, specifically relationship psychology. It's been demonstrated that there's a particular ratio of positive to negative interactions that help predict the outcome of relationships. Marriages with less than this ratio are far more likely to lead to a divorce. The ratio is roughly 5-to-1. For example, if there are less than 5 compliments you give your significant other for every 1 criticism, then they're more likely to believe that you criticize them more than compliment them. If you have less than 5 good days a week with your significant other for every 1 bad day, then when you think back over your months or years together, you're more likely to think that you have an equal amount of bad days than good, even more bad days than good. The mind-blowing part is really thinking about that ratio and what it means about our memory and perspectives. Ideally, we'd like to think that if we get complimented about as often as we're criticized, we'd remember a balanced mix of both. But the evidence supports the idea that we really take negative words or events to heart, and that it takes a highly disproportionate amount of positive praise or interactions to balance them out. Something to keep in mind when considering both how you feel and how you treat others. Gotcha. So, you're beautiful, you make me happy, your dinners are lovely, I love what you've done with the house, I appreciate you running me a bath, babe, I think you need to lose a few pounds. Upon reflection, I wouldn't dare. I value my life. Dialect continuums in linguistics. Among certain languages, such as the Slavic languages and Western Romance languages, like Portuguese, Galician, Spanish, Catalan, etc., there's no fine line from where one language ends and another begins. However, due to standardization, this is no longer largely the case. Instead, you'd have one language gradually changing into another as you go farther and farther away. Think of it like in Britain, where the further north you go, the more Scottish the dialect becomes, until eventually you have full-on Scots. Sort of along the same lines, I was fascinated to learn that there are regional dialects in British Sign Language. For example, there are 3 separate signs for the holiday, depending on where you are in the country. Everyone always associates dopamine with enjoyable experiences or happiness, but in a certain part of the brain, how much dopamine is released can be calculated as the amount of reward received compared to the amount of reward expected. This is literally a quantitative signal. If you expected there to be 10 sweets in the bag but there were actually 12, then you'd get an increase in dopamine release, but not as much as if there were 14 sweets in the bag. Similarly, if you expected 10 and received only 8, you'd actually get a dip in the dopamine signal, but not as much as if you'd only received 6, and so on and so forth. This is one of those rare examples where a quantitative theory or model, reinforcement learning, can be mapped straight onto a neuroscientific phenomenon.
Is this why people get hooked on pessimism?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't expect anything, you're never disappointed, and thusly don't take dips in your dopamine levels. That's really interesting to me. I come from a behavioral economics background, and that's how they modified expected utility theory with prospect theory. Essentially, we just say that people get utility from changes rather than absolute numbers. For example, someone who received a $2,000 raise last year will be unhappy with a $1,000 raise this year, because even though it's good to have more money, it's a negative change from their expectations. I work with CRISPR-Cas9 system. It essentially allows us to edit the genome, adding or removing nucleotides or whole genes or altering nucleotides. While there were previous methods for editing genome, this one's quite simple. It requires a few plasmids, less than $100, a basic research lab, and someone who can do fairly basic molecular biology research. Researchers in China are using it on humans now for cancer therapy. It also has the possibility for transmitted disease treatment. Additionally, the part I find most fascinating and most scary are gene drives. We're able to use it to kill off all mosquitoes and thus eliminating Zika and malaria in a matter of a few mosquito generations. This would also be theoretically possible for other species that haven't been researched. I have a good one and a bad one. The bad: more than 2 out of every 3 people in the world carry a virus that causes oral or downstairs herpes. The good is that if you genetically remove one of HSV's key genes, GD, you get a vaccine strain that's protected mice against 10 times the lethal dose of the deadliest herpes strains ever discovered. In short, everyone might have herpes, but it won't always be forever. Wow, I knew that a lot of people had those pesky sores, but I didn't know it was that many. Yikes. Here's hoping we all get immunized like our author here predicts. Jevons paradox. The more energy efficient we make technology, the more energy we actually use. That actually makes a lot of sense now that I think about it. For example, I recently got a new phone that has much better battery life, 3 times the screen use time with only a 30% bigger battery. But despite the energy use being so much more efficient, I use the phone a lot more because I don't have to worry about the battery dying, making my overall energy use much higher than before despite being much more power efficient. Nuclear transmutation. It's 100% possible to turn lead into gold by yanking 3 protons out of a lead nucleus. It was first done in the 1920s. Of course, it's prohibitively expensive and ultimately a waste of money and energy, but it can be done.
The alchemists were right.
I'm an earthquake geophysicist. I study something most people have never heard of: slow earthquakes. In a regular earthquake, a fault, as in the crack between big pieces of rock, moves or slips very quickly. Typically, an earthquake takes a few seconds to occur. This rapid movement excites seismic waves, which are similar to sound waves that travel through the earth and cause shaking. In slow earthquakes, everything is the same except that high temperatures or fluid pressures cause the speed of fault slip to max out at a fairly low value. So we might get movement equivalent to what we would see in a magnitude 7 earthquake, but instead of occurring over seconds, it occurs over weeks, months, or even years. The slowness means no seismic waves and no damage. In fact, the traditional instrument used to study earthquakes, the seismometer, won't see these. So we use scientific-grade GPS instead and literally watch the rocks move. Unfortunately, slow earthquakes, while they relieve the forces where they occur, actually increase the probability of regular earthquakes on other faults or other parts of the same fault. There are actually documented cases of slow earthquakes triggering regular ones. The Great Tohoku, Japan earthquake of 2011 actually started off 2 weeks earlier with a slow earthquake. I'm working on trying to find ways to use slow earthquakes to forecast regular ones. Feto-maternal transfer. I learned about it in a neuroscience class. Especially when a woman is pregnant, stem cells can travel from the fetus to the mother and actually survive for long periods of time in the hippocampus, an area of the brain used for memory formation. I'm pretty sure the stem cells can survive in other parts of the body, but it's really cool to think that some of your DNA is in the part of your mother's brain where new memories are formed. In short, stem cells from a fetus can get transferred to the mother's hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for forming new memories. I remember a Radiolab episode about this. They told the story of a woman who had stem cells from a failed twin who she shared her mother's womb with. Some of those cells became ovaries. Later, when she had a baby, they found that while he was his father's son, she was not genetically his mother. Many animals use the location of the sun in the sky for navigational purposes. Many, but fewer animals use the way sunlight is polarized as a proxy for the location of the sun in the sky. This allows for a mental compass and is how many animals keep moving in their required direction. And many, although fewer again, animals use the moon for the same purpose. However, only one known species, the dung beetle, uses the way the moon's light is polarized to keep rolling their dung in straight lines. However, when the moon is absent from the sky, the beetles default to using the location of the Milky Way in the sky for navigation. 15 days of the month of October from the equator, we have both the moon and the Milky Way out of vision of the beetles. For these 15 days, they roll in almost random directions, during which they turn frequently and just generally look kinda drunk. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Tropospheric ducting. Shortwave radio signals up to about 30 MHz, which bounce off a layer of charged particles in the atmosphere and are reflected back down to Earth, which is why you hear so many AM stations at night. Normally, higher frequencies just poke straight through and go out into outer space. But under certain conditions, they pass through a gap in one layer, hit another and bounce along between the two, like when you get the ball trapped behind the bricks in Arkanoid, until eventually it bounces back out hundreds of miles away with almost no loss. So by sheer accident of meteorology, you can sometimes bounce VHF and UHF signals far further than they normally go, and they sound like they're just from down the road. So you've heard of stem cells, right? Long story short, cells that can transform into other kinds of cells whilst also dividing and reproducing forever. They're responsible for making new blood cells, driving wound healing, among other things. Really neat stuff. It's now fairly accepted in my field that deadly viruses also have stem cells. We think that these cancer stem cells aren't as susceptible to chemotherapy and are partly responsible for why the virus seems to come back even after very aggressive chemo. But as to their exact identity, strategies to destroy them, and where they come from, we're working on that. There have been a few posts specifically on STEM research, but this is the first one I've seen detailing some of the problems they can cause to the human system as opposed to the cures. Obviously, we should continue to study their medical applications, but it's novel to hear about the problems certain kinds cause that we have to learn to combat simultaneously. Meteorologist here. Upper atmospheric lighting is one of the most seldom understood aspects of meteorology. Above some thunderstorms, sometimes you can spot a jet of blue shooting up from the thunderstorms about 50 kilometers. Even more impressive are sprites, giant red emissions anywhere from 50 kilometers to 100 kilometers above the surface. And ELVs, which is an acronym for emissions of light and very low-frequency perturbations due to electromagnetic pulse sources, which are even crazier. They exist for only a millisecond but can expand to a radius of 400 kilometers from a storm as a very faint red light. Crazy stuff. It's not exactly mind-blowing, but it's a neat and recent finding that might interest anyone who keeps up with the vaccine topic. Post-mortem brain examinations of kids on the spectrum has shown improper cortical distribution. A little background, the layers of your cortex are established very specifically before birth. If you have a healthy brain, you will exit your mother with a clearly defined cortical distribution, and that layer differentiation does not continue post-birth. Thus, we can conclude that the disrupted cortex structures being found in autistic children cannot be attributed to vaccines, which are administered after birth. Furthermore, we can also conclude that autism begins affecting children in the womb. For reference, cortical and cortex are synonymous. C-section babies are, on average, less healthy and have more compromised immune systems. This is likely because the birth canal is smearing the last bit of mum's immune system programming before breast milk, as well as helping create a healthy bacterial environment for the newborn. Essentially, a mother's walls on the birth canal are coated in things that will help the baby adjust to life outside the womb. C-section babies are starting to get the benefits of this, with the doctors wiping the wall fluids onto the baby's face, mouth, and head. Flashover and backdrafts are pretty cool and terrifying. Basically, flashover is when you get to a point in a compartment with a set amount of ventilation where the heat release of the fire reaches a certain kilowatt and every combustible in the room ignites almost simultaneously. It's really freaking hot and it's really, really bad to be caught in. Backdraft is when there's a lack of oxygen in a compartment with no ventilation. The hot gases build and build and build, and then when oxygen is reintroduced to the building, it explodes in what is basically a fireball. Violently. Scientifically fascinating and also horrible to be a firefighter in. Surface science. Van der Waals forces between material are almost universally attractive, but it's possible to create a three-material stack of a surface, an intermediate, which is a liquid or potentially a thin film, and a contacting material that has a repulsive interaction, meaning that the surface and contacting material will repel each other like two north ends of a magnet. Applications would include surfaces that would be water, oil, dirt, a biohazard, or whatever proof, and frictionless interfaces, tested by AFM and undetectable at the pico-Newton level. Unfortunately, the thin films required are not easy or cheap to make, and development would be really, really expensive. Not quite mind-blowing, but definitely exciting. We now have microscopes that can achieve resolution in the low nm range in living cells. We can now start to research the dynamics of small subcellular organelles that are important for a wide range of things, such as embryonic development, cancer progression, and cell signaling. I'm a dentistry student, and yesterday a paper was published where a group of scientists managed to use an anti-Alzheimer's drug in order to build new dentin in damaged teeth. Pulp tissues are already capable of doing that, but new research is desperately trying to find agents that can speed up the process. So this is great news. Giving a person superpowers in VR, for example the power of flight, will prime concepts of superpowers and the heroes we associate it with it, and will increase helpful behavior. Long story short, there was a study wherein people had to fly with a helicopter or use hand gestures, like Superman, to fly in VR. After the experiment, the conductor accidentally spilled a pen case. The people flying like Superman were significantly more prone to jumping in and helping the conductor to pick up the pens. I really like the idea that the people tend to have the desire to use their powers for good rather than to go full-on supervillain. There's a documentary that's been released lately and it's called Most Likely to Succeed. It's about a new education method where it's 90% project-based. The teachers don't do much other than just let the students do their projects and give guidance, as well as organize what projects to do. It's a unique way of teaching that only works in specific schools. Some teachers and members of society think it's the greatest idea and every school should be using it. Me and other teachers don't see it as straightforward as it seems to be. I would recommend giving it a watch though. I live and study in Denmark, and to my knowledge, at least universities here, I don't know about high school, have an 80% project-based teaching. I moved here from a country that's 100% focused just on theoretical approach, and you just need to read and remember what you read. I can say in my case that project-based learning is way more efficient. That surprises the narrator not at all. Give me a concrete goal and clear steps to achieve it, and I will shine and complete stuff before the deadline. Give me a big, vacuous subject to find out information about and read about in my spare time, and my motivation will be very poor indeed. Right now, as we speak, you're being crossed by millions of particles per second and per centimeter square of your body. These very same particles will be able to fly across the Earth as easily as if they flew through a vacuum. In fact, to reliably stop them, you'd have to build a 3 light-years thick lead wall, i.e. a wall that would be 2/3 of the distance between the Sun and Alpha Centauri, the nearest star. Said particles are electrically neutral. They don't interact through nuclear force and are 100,000 times lighter than an electron, or perhaps even lighter. Yet we can detect them every day. Neutrinos are cool. Pretty much everything about sleep is terrifying, most of all that we don't really know what it is or why we do it or how it works. Why do you sleep? Because you get tired. How do you sleep? Well, here's a list of things that change while you sleep. What is sleep? When you aren't awake. What I find most disturbing is sleepwalking and parasomnias. Watching people sit up during a sleep study and finding out that they're still asleep. Opening their eyes and looking around, and then usually they pick at the wires, maybe lifting them up and tugging on them, or touching where they're placed on their head. And that's not even the really creepy part. That is that they don't pull them off or anything. Instead, I've so far only seen them all do the same thing. They give up. Like, you can read the facial expressions saying, "Screw it, this is too complicated for me to deal with," and they just lie back down and don't go back to sleep because they didn't wake up. They just close their eyes. It's not that the lights are on but nobody's home, it's the lights are on but you aren't in there. I mean, I'm not really a scientist, I'm just a lab tech, so maybe there's an explanation that makes it less disturbing. I'm not a scientist, but I've studied sleep and have on occasion sleepwalked. Your lower brain, active during sleepwalking, is quite capable of performing basic tasks without your conscious input, such as standing up, walking around, peeing, and so on. However, your cognitive maps are stored in your upper brain, which is needed for the complicated stuff. Sleepwalkers are generally trying to realize an external goal, such as needing the bathroom, eating due to hunger. However, without the upper brain, it makes a best guess, which is why it's common to hear about sleepwalkers getting up in the middle of the night and urinating on chairs or anything that might remotely resemble a toilet to something that doesn't know what a toilet is. In your example, I suspect the lower brain is trying to remove the wires, as I assume that the body might have a problem with things sticking onto it, such as, for example, leeches. But it lacks the cognitive ability to comprehend what's going on, but is somehow satisfied that there's no threat, so it doesn't boot the upper brain and goes back to sleep. Trees suck up water. Most people know that, but what blows my mind is that they don't have to be alive to do it. Dead, standing trees still suck up water. It's a structural component, not an active function of the living organism. Also, there's way more water from snowmelt than we ever thought there was stored in trees, based on a recent isotopic study of Alaska forests. Malaria parasites have shown resistance to every single anti-malarial drug in existence and can develop resistance before new drugs are even finished in trials. Not that there's a big push for anti-malarial drug development. Last I checked, there were 7 new drugs for male member dysfunction in the pipeline for every anti-malarial, and 64 drugs for heart disease. A problem a lot of people in malaria-endemic countries would be thrilled to live long enough to have. That about 1% of the noise you see on a TV when it's not tuned, the black and white dots with the horrible noise everyone hates, is the interference from the cosmic background radiation, the leftovers of the Big Bang. Some people know, but it blew my mind as a kid, and now I'm a physicist and it still does. galaxy lensing. I think it's just beautiful. Just like the way a magnifying glass works to make things appear bigger, large chunks of mass in our universe, like galaxies, have a strong gravitational pull over large amounts of space that focuses light, giving a distorted look, which leads to some special cases. It often results in an Einstein ring, but not in all cases. This phenomenon has been used to probe universes and can give good insight into finding better measurements on the Hubble constant, without local contamination like many other methods. The Casimir effect. Simply put, if two unchanged plates are brought very close together, due to the presence of virtual particles, the plates are forced together. Only smaller wave functions can fit between the plates, meaning less virtual pairs are created there, creating a pressure difference between the inside and outside, forcing the plates together. What really obvious thing have you only just realized? That the phrase mint condition means like new because it's the condition coins leave the mint in. I must have been around 11 or 12 years old when I realized that in order of appearance during the end credits of a movie doesn't list the actors or actresses by who is just the most good-looking. I learned a couple of years ago that it's not the mayor of bad news, it's actually the bearer of bad news. I'm 25. Cilantro and coriander are the same plant. I only just today realized that the walk the plank on a boat is not a special edition that pirates added to their ships as a means of public execution that looked like a little wooden diving board. It is in fact the very same plank as the gangplank that you'd normally use to get on and off the ship. It is not the presence of the plank that is threatening, but the absence of the dock. Until recently, I also thought that, despite the obvious name, being keel-hauled meant that you were just thrown off the ship and left behind. I didn't realize that they tied you to a line, threw you off, and dragged you under the ship's keel. That you have to add a can of water to Campbell's soup. Apparently, I've been drinking straight condensed soup this whole time. The first time I visited the USA, I was on my own and in New York and going to all of the museums. I kept seeing signs that said no strollers and thought, because we call strollers prams in the UK, that you guys were just super strict about the proper amount of attention required to visit a museum. I actually pretended to show more interest than I had in order to not be thought of as some deadbeat out for a casual stroll. It wasn't until about day 3 that I saw a no strollers sign that included a graphic for idiots like me. That calling someone simple is just a nice way of calling someone stupid. My wife informed me of this after 28 years of my grandma calling me simple. I realized at the age of 26 that narwhals are real because they were on an Octonauts episode. I walked into the room and was like, I thought they only do real animals on this show, and then the kid's dad said, "You're joking, right?" Honestly, we can give this author some leeway for not realizing that the unicorn dolphin was in fact a real creature. Now we just have to trick him into thinking that the horsey version is actually a living, breathing fauna as well. That when I was a kid and my dad would take me to the video store on Friday nights and he would go into the back room where only adults were allowed, that he was looking at naughty adult films. I kept seeing the same Chinese characters on restaurants' signs and I always wanted to know what it meant. A week ago I found out. They mean restaurant. I used to always pour water into our coffee maker 1 glass at a time. It was such a pain in the butt, especially to fill the reservoir to the number of cups I wanted. Until I realized I could just fill the carafe with water, which has the exact same measurements, and pour the water in that way. I recently realized I was allergic to carrots. I just thought they made everyone's mouth numb, you know? Like almonds. I also learned recently that I have an almond allergy. Same here. I thought that raw hazelnuts don't taste good because they give this weird tingle in your mouth. Then I found out I had a nut allergy when it suddenly turned from tingle to anaphylaxis, and I ended up in a hospital for eating nut chocolate. Oh, same! I asked my husband why carrots made your mouth itchy. I'm a 35-year-old woman. I always thought you can't have your cake and eat it too was a weird saying, because why wouldn't I be able to eat my fricking slice of cake? It's my cake! Nobody was telling me that I can't have my cake. It turns out they mean you can't eat the cake while also still retaining it. Once it's eaten, it's gone. An idiom I didn't understand until this year. I'm 27. The Italian version of this is that you can't have a full bottle and a drunk wife, or something along those lines. This sounds ridiculous, but I recently found out about the term knee-jerk reaction. My whole life I'd been saying it how I heard it and just figured it was spelled something like knee-jerk reaction, like it was some psychology term. English was not my first language, so I was mind-blown when I realized how keys, kiss, he's, his, this, these, among other things, differed in sound and pronunciation. I first noticed this when I told my boyfriend I wanted a keys, and he looked very confused. Now I try my best to pronounce them properly. My whole life I thought pay-per-view was actually pay-per-view, because I'd only ever heard people say it and only recently saw it written out. My boyfriend didn't know that his electric toothbrush has a timer on it that goes off at 1 minute and 2 minutes. He actually returned it and got a new one thinking it was broken, since the timer is just a brief sort of pause and reduction in the vibration. He'd be like, "What the frick? I literally just charged this fricking thing," thinking that the battery was already dying. One day, I can't remember exactly what the conversation was, I brought up how I liked that my toothbrush let me know when I'd brushed long enough, and it was like a light bulb went off in his head. And suddenly he put it together that was what his toothbrush was doing the whole time. That the big ship's wheel I got to turn as a kid was not actually controlling the cruise ship. This jogged my memory of something. When I was around 13, I was on a flight with a bunch of other kids. I fell asleep during the flight but woke up during some turbulence. A couple of kids near me saw me waking up startled and made a big show of saying, "Wow, I can't believe the pilot did a barrel roll." A few other people I talked to about confirmed it, and it took me embarrassingly far into adulthood to realize some people were just messing with me. I mean, a pilot on a commercial flight wouldn't do that, right? I was 28 before I realized the meaning to the "why is 6 afraid of 7" joke. I always just thought it was dumb. 7, 8, 9, like you're just counting. The electric bill wasn't paid until later in my life. I realized that to be in one's birthday suit, it means to be without clothes. I thought for the longest time it was a specific set of clothes you would wear on your birthday each year. I found out when I asked, what happens when you don't fit in your birthday suit anymore? For the longest time, I always thought that prima donna was pre-Madonna. Principal Belding from Saved by the Bell is named Bell Ding. The reason the cord on the vacuum spins is so that you can take the whole cord off at once instead of unraveling it one loop at a time, like I have been my whole life. That parents have children write letters to Santa so they can figure out what to buy them for Christmas. I can't believe how I never put that together after 32 years on this earth. I thought it was just a fun little tradition. My bedroom door was broke and I finally got around to fixing it. I thought the knob was broke because it was pushed in towards the door. So I pulled it out and realized that was how you locked the door. As a small child, maybe like age 4, my family told me the powder room door at my grandparents' house didn't lock. I had a reputation for accidentally locking myself into places, so they didn't want me locking myself in there, I guess. I was 18 before I accidentally locked the door just like that. Realized how it worked and emerged from the bathroom mortified and amused that I'd gone all these years thinking that the door just didn't lock. No one even remembered lying to me about the lack of lock. It's called men's wear as in W-E-A-R house and not men's warehouse as in a regular warehouse. It's been a couple of years since I realized this and I think it's just a clever name now.
What the frick? I just looked it up and I still don't believe you.
Consider the narrator educated about this as well. That's a play on words that's completely escaped me for several decades since I learned about the store. The villain in Halloween is not played by Mike Myers. It would have been a lot funnier if he was. This little piggy didn't go to the market to do any shopping.
Wait. Then why are the other pigs eating roast beef? I feel like there's at least one of these pigs with its own agenda.
For a long time, I thought that to bust a nut meant that you were going to kick a guy in the nuts or beat him up. So anytime I was getting worked up or angry talking about some guy, I would say, I'm going to bust his fricking nut, not really knowing what I was meaning. Nobody ever said anything, but it was always followed by my friends laughing, so I assumed it was because I was being dramatic. Years go by, and my coworker is telling me about some rude person he met, and I said, you should definitely bust that guy's nut, to which he paused and said, do you even know what that means? Suffice it to say, I was extremely embarrassed and horrified when he explained it to me. Similarly, I had a friend who didn't know that friends with benefits meant, well, you know. She thought it meant like a friend from work who was literally beneficial to your work.
I had a boss that was under the impression that bust a nut meant to work extremely hard. Suffice to say, our team meeting ended awkwardly when Sean would tell us to all go and bust a nut after the meeting.
Super embarrassing, but in college I would order Roman Cokes because I thought everyone else was ordering the same thing. It turns out I misheard everyone and found out it was just rum and Coke. When teenagers said we're going to TP a house, I always thought it was teepee, and it never made sense to me since they just covered a house with toilet paper. I recently realized that they didn't mean put up a Native American tent, and that TP was the initials for toilet paper. I'm 27. This girl I know has a dog named Diogi. 2 years into knowing her and being around Diogi, I was having a conversation with her sister-in-law and said, "I love the name Diogi. How did she come up with that?" Her sister-in-law responds, "D-O-G." And I said, "Yeah, it's a neat name." She started laughing and said, "No, D-O-G, the way you spell dog." I'm still mind blown about this. We got a chocolate Labrador quite a few years ago. My dad has been known to name animals after what species they are. This time around, my mom wouldn't let him name the dog Dog, so he named her Kitty. He also named his horse No Name. This is why we don't let him name animals anymore. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Pufferfish suck in water, not air.
Okay, yeah, I saw one get pulled from the ocean and deflated and it spat out water. I was shocked to my very core. Everyone else was like, yeah, of course.
That they put measurement stickers next to gas station doors, so if a robber is running out of the store, you can get a better estimate of their height. I always thought they were just there for something fun to do on road trip stops. More than that, they're not actually accurate if you stand against them and measure that way. They're supposed to be placed so the camera will show the correct height of the person, compensating for the angle of the camera. I'm currently in my mid-30s. I didn't realize until I was about 28 years old that my mum's name was Betty and her sister's name was Wilma. Betty and Wilma, from the Flintstones. And yes, they were definitely named after the cartoon, I asked. Flash forward 2 years later, and my Aunt Wilma informed me that they were fraternal twins. Again, another thing for 30 years I hadn't known. A few folks have asked for a bit of context on the twin thing. My mum died when I was fairly young, so I never had her birthday as a thing. And I wasn't super close to Wilma, so I wasn't really celebrating hers either. I guess it was just known in my family, so nobody ever mentioned it until totally randomly she said something about it. On the name thing, they actually both went by their nicknames their whole lives. So I never even thought of them as Betty and Wilma, but just Mum and Aunt Cookie. She likes to bake. When I was little, we had an Australian shepherd named Sydney. I didn't understand why her name was Sydney until 18 years later. I saw a place labeled as Public House when I moved nearby recently. It was at that moment I realized, oh, that's why they call them pubs. It's short for public house. In Russian phrase, public house means a whorehouse, not a pub. I wonder. When people say that tornadoes sound like trains, they don't mean that tornadoes whistle a choo-choo sound. My sister asked me about 2.5 months ago when we were watching John Wick 3 during the desert scene if they were real, and I asked what were real, and she said sandlands. And I busted out laughing so gosh darn hard and said, "You mean deserts? Yeah, they're real." Thinking about it right now got me laughing. Up until last year, I thought Nat Geo was a person. I then realized it was short for National Geographic.
Nathaniel Giotopoulos actually was a founder of the channel, but it's only a coincidence.
I thought astigmatism was a stigmatism, so I thought you could have two stigmatisms. Honestly, in my 30s, I've been wondering about this for the better part of a decade now and never bothered to look it up. I'm learning so many facts for dummies in this video. Today, my friend realized pipe cleaners were originally for cleaning pipes, after I suggested using one to clean a metal straw because it's similar to a pipe.
Oh, I had that one about 7 years ago when my high butt was trying to clean out a glass pipe.
Man, this is so stupid. Someone should invent some sort of frickin' pipe cleaner. Oh. That people who always seem to know what direction it is, north, south, east, and west, aren't somehow magical magnets but are rather just noticing where the gosh darn sun is in the sky. Why did no one tell me? The sun is a huge indicator, but I know plenty of people who keep track of direction without the sun without even thinking about it. I'm not one of them. I regret to inform you all that it just occurred to me the other day that The Sims is called The Sims because they're in a simulation. I'm 26. That getting your tires rotated means moving the tires to a different location on the car and not just spinning the wheel. I learned that allspice is actually one spice and not a blend of spices containing cinnamon and nutmeg.
I also just learned that from your comment.
Personal injury lawyer commercials play more frequently during daytime TV because their clientele is injured, stuck at home watching daytime TV.
The houses in Bikini Bottom are car mufflers.
What the frick?
And Patrick is dumb and knows nothing because he lives under a rock. Bikini Bottom is named after the nuclear bomb testing site at Bikini Atoll, and sea life is weird from the radiation. Also, bikinis are named after the radioactive site as well. In Pokemon, there is a same-type attack bonus where if you use a move that is the same type as the Pokemon itself, then the move does 1.5 times the damage. People also refer to it as stab damage, which I thought was just a colloquial term for 1.5 times damage. I only just realized that stab stands for same-type attack bonus. My mum used to make my sisters and I belly buttons for dinner. I was 27 when I realized that they were actually tortellini, but she knew we were dumb kids and would refuse something named so strange even though they were delicious. To clarify how dumb we were, once she was making fried shrimp for dinner. My sisters and I hated fried shrimp, but we loved popcorn shrimp from Long John Silver's. We complained, so my mum said, "Okay, go away and I'll make you some popcorn shrimp instead." We left and she says she took half the shrimp she was already using and cut it in two and then fried it that way. We cleaned the fricking bowl. We were stupid kids and she was a good, smart mum. Cruella de Vil was a cruel devil. The word for explorer in Spanish is exploradora. Dora the Explorer is a Spanish play on words. When I was a kid, my mum told me my rabbit Rosie went to live on a farm. In my early 20s, I saw an episode of The Sopranos where everyone makes fun of Tony when he realizes his dog didn't really go to live on a farm. That's when I realized Rosie had not gone to a farm either. And I would like to officially apologize for the cascading wave of terrible realizations my post has caused. Truly, we sit on a throne of lies.
Oh man, I dated a girl once who started telling me about her old dog who went to live on a farm. I didn't even say anything, but just the look on my face made her stop and think about it for the first time and go, oh no. And we had a good laugh about that, but it was pretty wild to see the realization in real time.
Today, the radio taught me Mariah Carey wrote and sang All I Want for Christmas Is You. All this time, I thought it was just a cover that she did so well that people loved it more than the original. Turns out, it is the original. Undergarments and socks are there to cover places that sweat and stink so that you don't sweat and stink on the thing on top of the undergarment, and can replace the undergarment more often. Except for men's undershirts, which exist so that nobody has to see my moobs when I wear a white dress shirt. Cat toes. I knew they existed, I've seen them and everything. It's an extremely obvious thing. A few weeks ago, I touched a cat's paw and started laughing like it was the craziest thing ever. Then proceeded to make my discovery known. You're all welcome. Also, bunnies and a bunch of other animals have their own kind of toe things too. Phineas and Ferb are shaped like a P and an F. The song It's Getting Hot in Here isn't actually talking about here's temperature. I felt very, very stupid. Dove soap and Dove chocolate are from different companies. Cigarettes are called cigarettes because they're mini cigars. Alucard from Castlevania is Dracula backwards. I honestly thought that this script was just going to be a home run of me laughing at other dummies who missed self-explanatory expressions and obvious references, but this is the 9th or 10th time one of them has blown my mind, so what does that say about me? Actually, don't answer that question. In the movie Cats vs. Dogs, when the dog goes, "Son of my mom," he's actually saying son of a B word.
Remember that the secret agent blue-gray kitten with the Russian accent? That breed of cat is called a Russian blue.
That the Houston Astros comes from astronauts, and the Baltimore Ravens are because Edgar Allan Poe lived and is buried in Baltimore. I'm 30 and realized a few months ago that howdy is cowboy for how do you do. Tenure is a whole word and not 10-year, which is what I thought teachers got as like job security once they'd worked for 10 years. Say My Name by Destiny's Child is about a girl on the phone to her man and she wants proof that he's not with another girl. I realized when I was 16 that reindeer were real. I 100% thought they were fake like elves and Santa Claus. This is so stupid, but I didn't realize my mums were gay until I was almost 14 and I literally heard my mum say, "I'm gay" to my grandma as a joke. I knew that lesbians and same-sex and gays were relatively interchangeable, but it didn't click as "my mums are lesbians," which is another term for being gay, and they are gay, until that moment. I also have a gay mom, but I didn't know the word lesbian till 6th grade. I got into a massive fight with my best friend because she called my mom a lesbian, and I didn't know what that was, so I thought it was an insult. Nope, turns out if your mom has a girlfriend, she's probably a lesbian. I'm 25 next week and I still think about it. The Grammys are called that because the awards are gramophones. That Ecuador is named after the equator. Yep, literally just equator, but in Spanish. My friend, 22 years old, only realized last year that dolphins have to swim and live in the water to survive. He thought they're land mammals, but they just really like to swim for fun. That Michelangelo's David is David from David and Goliath. How did I not know this? I thought it was just a dude called Dave. I love how many comments I'm getting from people learning this today or very recently, and who just thought he was some dude called Dave as well. We got there in the end, guys. Better late than never. Bonus, I also never knew there was a sling. I thought that was his trousers. And yes, I honestly thought that. I never saw the rocks. That American Express and Amex are the same thing, and I've been helpfully telling customers in Australia, "Yep, we take both," for years. Okay, this was a couple of years ago, but it was something I realized way too late in life. You're supposed to use the towel to dry yourself after a shower. I was just wrapping it around myself and walking around until I air dried. I live in a part of Chicago called Greektown for 8 years, and I never realized the blue and white Christmas lights were meant to represent the colors of their flag. It just dawned on me today. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.